Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's Planning and Environmental Protection Committee. Before I go to the actual agenda, just to remind people of a few little housekeeping rules. Obviously, if the fire alarm goes off, please make your way to the nearest fire exit, which is outside, and obviously over towards the car park, which is the gathering area. Toilets are also, as you came in, near reception areas. Any problems, ask one of the members of staff and they'll sort you out. Okay, we'll move to agenda item number 1, please, Dan. Apologies for absence.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We had apologies from Councillor Andrew Bond and Councillor Sandra Bond as an attendance substitute.
Thank you. Councillor Bond, thank you for subbing for Councillor Bond. Item 2 is declarations of interest. No, none of those. Item 3. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hiller. No, you're okay. Item 3 is members' declaration of intention to make representations as a ward councillor. Councillor Warren, are you speaking at that time?
I'll be speaking on 5.3.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? No? Thank you. Item 4 then is minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of October 2021, pages 5 to 14 in your packs. If you're okay with them, could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Hiller and a seconder. Councillor Iqbal. Any dissent on those? Are they all okay? Yes, Councillor Jones. Mike.
Doesn't look like I was there, Chair. Can't see my name anywhere, but I was definitely there.
Yeah, we'll sort that out for you. No problem. We'll make sure that changes. Everything else all right? No other problems? Councillor Brown?
They got me down as A, Brown, and it's Richard.
Okay, we'll get that altered as well. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, we'll move on then to item 5, which is development control and enforcement matters. Item 5.1 relates to the former Peterborough Market and car park site Northminster in Peterborough, and will be presented by Mrs. Bland.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. And this application is for the redevelopment of the former Peterborough Market and car park site. It's an outline planning application for a residential development of up to 315 units. It would be a build-to-rent scheme, and it would also include 2 ground floor commercial units, the creation of car parking and a substation, and also landscaping, public realm and other associated works. The slide in front of you shows the red line of the planning application site, and you'll see that it includes the now demolished multi-storey car park, the current existing market buildings, and also the area of open space known as Laxton Square. The red line does not, however, include the former courthouse known as 5th Avenue. The roads surrounding the site are to the west Cattle Market Road, to the east Northminster, and to the south City Road. Okay. There are 2 aerial photographs to follow. The first one is looking north, and you'll see on this that the main buildings surrounding the site have been labelled. So, for example, you can see the location of Herwood Cross, Edwards, the former Embassy building, Bayard Place, also the Solstice nightclub, and 5th Avenue, the courthouse building. The aerial photograph shows the existing buildings on the site. It shows the site with the multi-storey having been demolished and laid out for temporary car parking. The next slide shows the view to the south, and in the distance you will see the Grade 1 listed Peterborough Cathedral and also Peter's Court, which is another important listed building in the vicinity of the site. You can also see Toothill Close, which is a residential conversion, and again the Solstice from a different view. What's important to note from these slides is that this is an area of change, notably with the demolition of the former car park, and also that there are existing office buildings which have now either received consent or have been converted to residential accommodation by the way of flats, therefore introducing a greater amount of residential development in this area. The next 2 slides show some images of the site as it was previously, with the multi-storey car park in place. And you can see how that is a substantial building located next to the market. The next slide shows some current views of the site as existing at present, with views towards the market, with the cathedral in the background in the top left-hand corner. Bayard Place to the right. This is a former office building that has permission to be converted to residential. Those works are underway, have been completed, and also the proposal included a 2-storey addition to the top of the building itself, therefore raising it in height from its original form. The next slide gives you an indication of the local plan allocations and designations in this area. Local Plan Policy 47.5 identifies the Northminster Opportunity Area, which sets out that this will become a mixed-use area, including offices and residential. It requires any new development to protect and enhance historic assets, especially the cathedral and Peter's Court. It envisages the potential relocation of the market, and like the rest of the city centre core area, envisages a reduction in the number of vehicles to the area. The site, which is shown by the red star, is not within a conservation area. The park and the city centre conservation areas are located to the north and to the south of the application site. Okay. This illustrative plan we're displaying in order to give you an appreciation of the form of the building before we go into looking at it in more detail. What you can see here is that the proposed new building, although this is illustrative as it is an outline application, would form a building comprising 2 wings, and it would have a stepped elevation, stepping from the north to the south and reducing in height. And you can see that the stepped nature of the development would allow for terraces to residential flats and also to roof gardens. This next slide shows a vertical limitations parameters plan. Now, as I've mentioned before, this is an outline application with only access for consideration at this point, in addition to the principle of development. Further details of scale, massing, landscaping and materials will follow through subsequent reserve matters applications. But in order that we control the height and the limits on the height of the building, the applicant has submitted a parameters plan, and this sets out the maximum height of the building and also the number of stories. So this plan shows that it would be a 10-storey building with a height of 33.25 metres. There would be an increase in order to accommodate the lift and the headroom for the lift, giving a maximum height at that point of 35.25 metres. So in the plan in front of you, the very dark blue squares on the roof represent the areas for lift shafts and the headroom to accommodate those. The blue areas that they sit on would represent the maximum 10-storey height, 33.25 metres. And connecting the 2 wings of the building would be a 3-storey element that would be 11.2 metres. The other colours on the slide show a number of different things. The purple area to the top of the slide shows an area that would be set out for car parking and pedestrian access. 50 car parking spaces would be proposed. The beige area would comprise a private amenity courtyard. This would be open space that would serve the residents of the proposed building. The green area comprises public open space. This would be areas that would be open to the public. Currently, part of that is accommodated by Laxton Square. That would be increased in size and would be enhanced as part of these proposals. Okay, so looking at the proposal in a little bit more detail, again, this is an indicative general arrangement plan only. And what that shows is the footprint of the building in white. To the left-hand side of the slide would be a suggested layout for the car parking area. And then surrounding the site would be the areas of private and public open space. And it also shows how bin stores and cycle parking could be accommodated. There would be 2 commercial units, and you can see those as the larger floor area units at each end of the wings of the development. They would be for food and drink uses and also various Class E uses in addition. There would also be a small kiosk within the Laxton Square area. One other thing that this slide shows is how the top arm of the top wing of the building would be slightly cranked in its layout, and you can also see 2 lines on the plan there that show the sort of the views that could be obtained towards the cathedral from a point on Northminster. Now, one thing to note about this scheme is that it is a scheme that is for build to rent. This is a new form of housing investment, and what it means is that the whole block would be managed by a single operator. All the units would be rented, and often with longer leases than might expect in private rented accommodation. In this particular case, the development would be a certain type of build to rent called private affordable rent, and that is because the rents would be discounted to 80% of local market rent levels within similar developments within Peterborough. Under the National Planning Policy Framework, this is a type of affordable housing under the definition of affordable housing in the NPPF. Again, this is a little bit different to what members will have come across before. It's a relatively new type of affordable housing. It's not social rent, it's not shared ownership. It would be a private rent, but set at a more affordable level. That would be 80% of the market levels in this area. And as part of the application, the controls over this form of development would be set out within a Section 106 agreement accompanying any grant of planning permission. Other things that Section 106 would cover would be a periodic review of the rent levels, a means of setting the local market rent by an independent expert, and other matters which I'll come on to under the heads of terms of the application. I'd also point out that this application includes for a range of different housing types. So it would include 20% one-bedroom flats, 27% two-bedroom, four-person flats, 25% two-bedroom, three-person flats, and then also some larger units, 15% three-bedroom flats, 7% townhouses, and 6% maisonettes. This differs from other flat developments within the city centre, which predominantly tend to only provide for one or two bedroom flat units. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, I'm now going to take you through a number of cross sections and also views that look to assess the building heights as part of this development. So the first slide that we're looking at here shows a cross section including the existing development that we saw in one of the aerial photographs known as Bayard Plaza. So on the top part of the slide, that's the building located to the left. And you can then see the proposed development, and you can see that stepping down in height towards Laxton Square. Now, one thing I would point out in these slides, for those of you that have been listening closely, the heights on these drawings, you can see that the maximum height of the 10 stories would be 31.8 metres. On the parameters plan that I showed you previously, The maximum height for 10 stories would be 33.25. These plans are showing an illustration of the development. The fixed points in terms of height would relate to the parameters plan, and a slightly different height has been shown here, as it's an illustrative drawing, and a little bit of leeway has been allowed within the parameters plan should each individual story height change just slightly. You appreciate that over a 10-story development, an increase in, say, 10 centimetres on each one can add up to a difference, and therefore the parameters plan make an allowance for that. So these are illustrative plans. However, I think they give a good representation of the overall height. So on the next slide, we're looking at here a comparison of the proposed development in conjunction with one existing, should be Hereward Tower, shown on the left-hand side of the top slide, and also a development that has planning permission but's not yet been built, which is the Solstice. And you can see there that there would be similar levels of heights being proposed in this development, particularly in relation to the Hereward Tower. And on the final cross-section, we're looking at a view here in relation to the cathedral. So on the top slide, the cathedral is over on the left-hand side. The proposed development is towards the right. And I draw your attention to the dotted lines running horizontally across the slide. The orange dotted line shows the height of the spire of the cathedral. The green light shows the height of the tower. And you can see that the development is well below those. Turning to the next slide. Now I'm going to take you through a number of views. These views have been identified in a heritage impact assessment prepared by the applicant. These views have been agreed with the Council's Conservation Officer and also with Historic England. And they also take into account views identified by the Civic Society. The first view that we're looking at is from the Stanley Recreational Ground near Crowthorne Road. And what we're looking at here is a view of the proposed development when it was first submitted to us at the pre-app stage. So looking across the Stanley Rec, you can see the cathedral in the background. There's a blue line between the trees that provides the outline of the proposed building. The next slide shows that building, which has reduced in its overall height and form as a result of the overall reduction in height by 2 stories of the development since the pre-app stage. And the line that is outlined in red shows the outline of the Solstice, which was approved by committee some months ago. So you can see here how views of the cathedral tower and spires will still be retained as part of the views from Stanley Recreational Ground, albeit with the Solstice development in the foreground and the proposed development behind. Okay, the next slide is a view from the embankment looking north towards the cathedral. And the outline in blue that you can see just above the tree line is the development as it was submitted originally in July when the application came before the council. The next slide shows how that outline has reduced in height, and this is as a result of input from our conservation officer and also Historic England, who were concerned about the heights of the building, and they have been reduced in height. The next slide shows views from London Bridge, looking towards the cathedral, towards the north. And again, just above the tree line, there is the blue outline of the proposed development at the time of the first submission of the application. And then the next slide shows that very much reduced, so it is within the tree line. And what Historic England advised the council is that the outline of the building should not exceed the parapet of the cathedral. So this is the parapet of the roof. It's lower than the spire, it's lower than the tower, it's lower still. And this means that the impact of the building would be negligible in terms of its views towards the cathedral. The next slide shows you views from the eastern side of the embankment open space, with the cathedral very prominent here. I think we've just moved, yes, this is the July planning application before the building was reduced in height, and then the next slide shows that as it's currently proposed. So again, you can see how the reduced height keeps the building within the line of the trees and doesn't impact on the views of the cathedral. The final two slides I have for you are taken from Northminster. This is a view taken from the northern part of Northminster, looking south towards Toots Hill. And then the next slide shows a view from slightly further south. This would provide a framed view of the cathedral with the proposed development on the right-hand side. And you would still be able to see an element of the cathedral, but also St. Peter's Court, and there would be a greater area of open space to the front. Okay, the next slide. Okay. As I mentioned before, access is one of the detailed matters for consideration today. So I'm going to take you through the access and the off-site highway works. The proposal shows there would be a new access from Northminster in the northeast corner leading into the car parking area. And there would also be a loading bay on Northminster itself. Next slide. And this shows a further loading bay again on Northminster. Then on the next slide, in terms of Cattle Market Road, there would be some adjustments to the loading bays and parking areas in order to achieve access for refuse vehicles to the site. And the next slide then shows some changes to the location of the disabled parking. In the update report that you have in front of you, there have been various amendments made to the detailed highway plans, and they've been made at the request of the local highway authority. They now provide further clarification on visibility displays, curb radii, the location of the loading bays, drop crossings, carriageway width, impact on disabled car parking and footways. This will improve the area for pedestrians and cyclists and will also allow for the proper servicing of the site, both in terms of the residential units, online deliveries, for example, and also servicing to the commercial units while maintaining an acceptable level of highway safety. As a result of these changes, there is no objection from the local highway authority, from the drainage team, or from the waste team. Okay. Now, the scheme also intends to improve the public realm around the development. This slide shows an illustration of what proposals might look like for the residents' courtyard. This would be the area solely for the use of residents within the development, and it would be contained between the two wings of the building. The next slide shows the wider improvements to the Laxton Square area and some ideas about how that might be improved. And I would point out that the Council's independent urban design and landscape advisors raised no objection to the scheme. Okay, and then turning to the next slide, we have an illustration of what the development might look like from City Road. And then another view from a different direction. And if we could just stay on this slide, Dan. It's in terms of assessing the application. As you'll see from the committee report, first of all, in relation to the principle of the development, an opportunity area for Northminster has been established within the local plan. It provides no limit on the number of dwellings for this area. The proposal in front of you comprises a mix of residential, commercial and open space that we consider reflects the market circumstances at present and will result in redevelopment of a rundown area. In terms of the market, that will be relocated to a new location on Bridge Street. That will be undertaken by the council under a separate project, and there is a separate process underway to relocate traders to that new location. In terms of meeting housing need, as mentioned previously, this would be a build-to-rent scheme that provides for discounted rents at 80% of local market levels. It would be a 100% affordable housing scheme, and it would be supported by a grant of £14 million from the combined authority. And the purpose of this grant is to enhance the affordable housing provision from 30%, which is the requirement in our local plan, up to 100% of the scheme. Therefore, this will result in a clear benefit to the city through the delivery of affordable housing. There has been an objection from the council's housing team on the basis that discounted rents will not provide for the most needy within the city. And while this is recognised, it's also accepted that there are a range of affordable housing products available as set out in the NPPF, and private affordable rent is one of them. So the proposals in this case would provide for a different type of affordable housing to those who are able to rent but may not be able to afford the full market rents within the city centre environment. This type of affordable housing is in compliance with the guidance on build to rent as set out in the National Planning Policy Guidance. Turning to heritage, I've taken you through the impacts in some detail already, but I would point out some key points. First of all, there have been amendments to the scheme from first submitted that are now acceptable to Historic England, who are a statutory consultee, and also to the Council's Conservation Officer. The views to the Cathedral and on Peter's Court, which are two listed buildings, have been minimised to a point that we now feel are acceptable. We also consider that there be improvements in terms of improving the street scene around Northminster and Cattle Market Road, and also enhancing the public realm at Laxton Square, therefore opening up views and new spaces from which to appreciate the cathedral from views from the north. It's also noted that impacts on views from Stanley Wreck, which have been one of the concerns of the Civic Society, should be seen in the context of the redevelopment of the Solstice, which has been approved. Looking at appearance, scale and design, these are all matters to be considered under reserve matters applications. But the illustrative plans that I think you've seen, together with the parameters plan that will control the amount of development, shows that the site could accommodate up to 315 flats. I think we can see that the buildings would be of an innovative design for Peterborough, and despite the fact that it would have a maximum 10-storey height, the scheme has been designed in such a way that it would step down to the more sensitive areas of the site and to a more human scale around Laxton Square. And that shows how the development has the potential to respond well to its surroundings and also set a standard for future development in this area. I've covered off highways, landscape, drainage and waste, but I would again draw your attention to the update report. And in terms of the impact on public car parking within the city, the update report refers to the potential for capacity for car parking within the city centre. Now I would just draw your members' attention to the fact that the statement is based on a study that was done in 2019, and it reflects a situation when the car park was first demolished. It's not been updated since the University Phase 1 and Phase 2 proposals have been granted planning permission. And this would result in a change in the capacity of the city centre car parks over a period of time up to 2024. I would also point out, however, that the Council in itself is in the process of creating a transport and parking strategy for the city centre, and therefore, as we're in a period where new developments are coming forward, there are allocations within the local plan to build on existing car parks, that the impact on car parks within the city centre is likely to change and vary over the next few years. One thing I would draw members' attention to is the fact that at the time of the submission of this application, the multi-storey car park had already been demolished for 2 years. That was done in 2019. And the reason for that demolition was not to make provision for this development. It was as a result of the car park being structurally unsound and needing to be taken down for safety purposes. So the baseline for this application is that there is no multi-storey car park in place, and whilst there are 100 temporary car parking spaces, it has been envisaged that these are meanwhile uses to take place before redevelopment comes forward. Looking at residential amenity, as this site is located within the city centre and is proposed for housing, then noise will be a material consideration. And there is a condition attached to this application to ensure that a noise assessment and mitigation is carried out and would need to be submitted alongside reserve matters applications. There are uses within the development that are for commercial purposes, and these have been controlled again by condition to limit those to drinking establishments, to restaurants, shops, financial and professional services, medical services and offices, but we have removed the ability for any gyms or children's nurseries to be provided on the basis of potential noise impacts. The development also shows that there would be sufficient privacy distances between the apartments themselves and also from those to nearby residential buildings, thereby meeting our space privacy standards. And now coming on to planning obligations. Again, would you draw your attention to the update report? This sets out the heads of terms that would be entered into for a Section 106 to control the development. So just taking you through those, there are 3 main areas. First of all, to control the build-to-rent nature of the scheme, and that would ensure it would remain in single management and ownership for at least 15 years, and it would be accompanied by a residential management plan to be approved by the council. The second area is around affordable housing. It would ensure that this remains as a 100% affordable housing scheme. But there would be 2 caveats to that. For 30% of the scheme, that would be secured as affordable housing in perpetuity, subject to a clawback mechanism which is set out in the National Planning Policy Guidance for build-to-rent schemes. This is because within the local plan we would expect up to 30% affordable housing as part of any market development. For the remaining 70% of the scheme, affordable housing would be secured for a period of 40 years with a clawback mechanism either as per national policy guidance or as otherwise agreed with the council. The Section 106 would also ensure that rents are set at a minimum discount of 20% relative to local market rents, and that would include any service charge. There would be a market review undertaken on a periodic basis by a qualified independent local agent, and the rents would be set at that level by that independent assessor. Tenancies would be offered for at least 3 years. That's an important element of this type of development. There would be provision for the rents to inflate via the Consumer Price Index until renewed, and then the market rents would also be reassessed on a periodic basis. The last part of the Section 106 is around public open space, and as open space contributions need to be provided off-site, there would be a number of commuted sums. Towards neighbourhood parks, this would be an amount of 121,000. For children's play, it would be 60,000. For allotments, it would be 13,000. And for natural green space, it would be 30,000. The figures are set out precisely in the update report, and it would also include 5 years maintenance of these areas. Okay. And I would just also point out that householder travel packs, which were to be included within the Section 106, would now be achieved by way of a condition, and that would be an extra condition to those that are set out in the committee report itself. So in conclusion, we consider this to be a high quality scheme that would boost housing supply in the city centre and would stimulate further investment in this somewhat rundown part of the city centre. It would provide much needed affordable housing, and the scheme would preserve the views and the setting of listed buildings, the Cathedral and Peter's Court, and would also not have an impact on conservation areas. There would be no adverse impact on highway safety, and it also has the potential to enhance the public realm to the wider benefit of the city centre. So the scheme is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the report and updated within the update report, but also subject to 2 caveats. First of all, that is not called in by the Secretary of State, as we have had a request to the Secretary of State potentially calling in the application. However, no decision has been made. Should members be minded to approve the application today, we would inform the Secretary of State, and we would then find out whether or not the Secretary of State decides to call the application in. The second caveat would be the completion of an agreement under Section 111 of the Local Government Act and Section 1 of the Localism Act. Now, the reason for this is that the site is still owned by the council, and the council, as local planning authority, cannot enter into a Section 106 agreement with itself. Therefore, the purpose of this other agreement would be to enable a Section 106 to be entered into, providing that commencement of development hasn't taken place on the site. So, in other words, there would be a clause within that other agreement preventing commencement of the development until a Section 106 agreement has been signed, as per the heads of terms set out in the update report. And that would then enable the site to be sold to the applicant, and then the Section 106 agreement would be agreed. So, Chairman, that is the end of my presentation, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Brand. Okay, I'm going to ask committee if they'll go with me on this. Effectively, we've been asked by the objectors if they would have a bit more than 5 minutes to address committee. Now, I think, given the size of the development here, I think that's a reasonable request, but obviously I have to pass it through you first. Similarly, obviously, the same time will be offered to the proposers and applicants. Are we all okay with that? Okay. Okay, in that case then, I will call David Turnock and Brian Martin, please, to the front. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and welcome to the committee meeting. If you would please, as you speak, introduce who is who, so as the committee know who they're speaking to after, and you'll have 10 minutes maximum between you to address committee when you're ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm David Turnock from the Civic Society. I will go first, if I may. I have to compliment Sylvia Bland on the thoroughness of her report that she's delivered to you today. We did have a number of reservations, primarily about the setting of the cathedral and the impact that this scheme would have on it. But just as Historic England and your conservation officer have withdrawn their objection now that 2 stories have been removed from the blocks, we likewise agree that this is an acceptable scheme in terms of its massing and height. It is about the same height as Hereward Tower, give or take a metre, and will fit in quite well in this part of the city. We think the silhouette of it, the way it tears down towards Peter's Court and has terraces facing towards the cathedral, will be a good feature of it. So I think it could develop into a good development in future. Yes, it's probably more dense than we originally wanted, but now that 2 floors have been removed from the roof, the cathedral as the dominant element in the city centre is rightly preserved, and the applicant and their agent have done some good work showing the viewpoints, and that justifies that actually it will not challenge the dominance of the cathedral. One of the other concerns we had about this was how much regeneration this will actually bring to this part of the city. And obviously the market is the item that's there at the moment that is not within this scheme before you today. Now, there have been a lot of words, and Sylvia did actually highlight earlier that there is another scheme to relocate the market, perhaps into Lower Bridge Street. So we would love to see the market recreated in a viable form. I think that's what every viable city requires, but it's not part of this scheme today. Slight disappointment on that score, but if it's not seen to be commercially viable, then as long as we have a market elsewhere in the city in future, I think that's an important thing for you as councillors to bring about, please. The other concern was the amount of car parking. There are only 50 car parking spaces in this scheme, and obviously that's broadly on the footprint of where there used to be a multi-storey car park. So there have been concerns, particularly from local residents and people who operate the new theatre on Broadway, for example, that it would be very difficult for people visiting those facilities to actually park close by. So I think judgment is still out on car parking and how this will work, but 50 spaces seems very light for what is going to be 300 plus flats, plus people who want to come to this part of the city. Having looked at the Laxton Square aspect of things, I think the regeneration there, the quality landscaping that is indicated is fine. One of our other concerns was going to be how you're going to secure this as a private affordable rent scheme, but again Sylvia has covered that in terms of the agreement that will take place to secure that. So you have the potential, I think, for a well-managed scheme, perhaps a bit larger than we in the Civic Society were expecting originally, but it has been toned down a bit, and I think you have before you a scheme today that you can approve. So I was here to object. You can see how we've moved on our stance on this. We have no further objections on this, so my summary would be I have no problem with you moving towards an approval on this scheme today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr Martin, if you want to continue.
I'm Brian Martin, a resident of Orton Longville. Today the committee has an important decision to make. It will be for years to come. The responsibility is made greater as this committee is the constituent part of the City of Peterborough, the direct beneficiary of the development. The committee does not need to be impartial in this consideration. It must be seen by the citizens of the city to be impartial. Consideration of this application today is premature. The description of the site clearly states former Peterborough Market. The market is clearly still operating. I shopped there on Saturday. The proposed development is contrary to policies LP 12 and LP 47 of the local plan adopted in July 2019. The loss of the retail within the main shopping area is to be regretted and is against that policy. The Council has to date neither supported proposals to improve the market nor, when working with market traders, identified a suitable new location. These commitments to the residents of the city were made in conjunction with the planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. As such, it is not within the powers of the City Council to unilaterally ignore these provisions. I note that the Council is at the very moment seeking representations on the proposed closure of Northminster Market. This consultation does not end until 4 p.m. 21st December 2021. Is this consultation a sham? Has the Council already irrevocably determined that despite any valid representations, the market is to close? I have yet to be convinced that a suitable alternative site has been provided for the market. My first observations are that the pretty gondolas at the southern end of Bridge Street seem to be totally inadequate for a 5-day market. As you may surmise, I will be bringing representatives to this consultation and any planning application for this proposal when it comes before you. Further, I consider the development of 315 dwellings on this site is a gross overdevelopment. The overdevelopment is demonstrated by the lack of off-street parking, off-street servicing. The parking is for one space per 6 apartments. Would you accept this from any other applicant other than yourselves? To sum up, the Civic Society and I have, in representation of the planning officers, demonstrated that there are sufficient reasons to refuse this application. I still believe that although the Civic Society now appears to be considered to be acceptable, the loss of the market, which has not yet been agreed, is still a condition for refusal. But I hear you ask, what would be the consequences of such a refusal? Well, it is possible that the developer will go away and present a more modest proposal that does not require servicing from the highway. Would you accept servicing from the highway from anybody else? And this servicing could be detrimental to citizens wishing to travel around the city on foot, cycle or electric car. On the other hand, the developer may consider that the current proposal is the best that can be achieved, and he will appeal the refusal. In this instance, the application will be considered afresh by a planning inspector. The proposed development will be the subject of a careful and, most importantly, independent consideration. If the inspector finds in favour of the applicant, the development, which will last a century, will have been delayed by a few months. In conclusion, therefore, I would urge you to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Members, do you have any questions, please, for Mr. Turnock or Mr. Martin? Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. It's a question for Mr. Martin. To kind of clarify maybe a little bit in terms of your objection, what you're saying is that you feel that the application it's a bit the cart before the horse, so that you're basically saying that the future for the market needs to be secured first before moving on. And as you rightly say, it does say former, and there is still a current market there on the site.
That is correct, Councillor, that we need to have a satisfactory relocation of the market that is comparable to the facilities that are provided in the existing market, and I believe that the current proposals that I have seen for Bridge Street are totally inadequate for a market that is there from day to day with the same trader, and whether the security overnight is adequate.
Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to just follow up with the question of what Councillor Hogg has said. So if I said to you that the council have an acceptable place secured for the market, would you still have your objections, or would you withdraw your objections about the scheme?
It would overcome the greater part of my objection. I still have some reservations as to servicing from the highway on a development this large. That I'm also concerned that you're providing only 50 car parking spaces, that is 1 per 6 apartments approximately, when recently you have approved at the Solstice site 36 parking spaces for what is, I believe, 56 apartments and 77 student spaces. I consider that this is still a gross overdevelopment of the site.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Thank you very much, gentlemen. You may return to your seats. For those that I call now, obviously considering the pandemic precautions, there are wipes on the desk, which I would encourage you to use before you use the mic again. Okay. So if I could call, please, Jeremy Good, Howard Bright, and Councillor Hiller, please. Yeah, I think that's good. I think, considering the pandemic, I think that's a good idea. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for attending. You're welcome to this meeting this afternoon. Just to also remind you, if you could, apart from Councillor Hiller, who we know well, introduce yourself when you're beginning to talk, so we know who we're responding to. So you'll have 10 minutes the same to address committee as soon as you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for introducing me, and I hope I don't need any introduction, but just for the sake of clarity, I'm a board member of Peterborough Investment Partnership, who are the applicants. I'm also the cabinet member for strategic planning. Howard Bright, you wanted to introduce yourself?
Thank you for seeing us this afternoon, committee. My name is Howard Bright. I run the Peterborough Investment Partnership.
Just need to pull the mic a bit closer, Howard. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's
okay.
better.
I'm Howard Bright. I run the Peterborough Investment Partnership on a day-to-day basis, working with Peter and my other board members, including Councillor Wayne Fitzgerald.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Can I just start by saying, Chair, I was heartened and I have to say very pleased to listen to David Turnock, the chair of the Civic Society, withdrawing their substantive objection to this scheme. It always is encouraging, I think, when people look at look at our revised plans and withdraw their objections. So that was very good to hear. Regeneration, ladies and gentlemen, what does it mean? The Oxford Dictionary determines this to mean an investment, breathing new life, more vigorous life into a re-existence of an institutional place, thereby forming afresh and creating a better life. That's what we're trying to do at Northminster, is to breathe new life into an area which has already been mentioned is pretty moribund. It isn't a particularly attractive area in our city centre, and much has been said about that, so I won't dwell on that. Being here this afternoon to present this item to committee gives me a huge pleasure. A few years ago, some of you may remember, I sat before the planning committee and explained what Peterborough Investment Partnership was all about. We just created Peterborough Investment Partnership, colloquially known as PIP. It was all about how we had a vision for the regeneration of the south bank of our city to create Fletton Quays, where we are today. It wasn't easy, you'll all be aware probably. We had detractors, we had critics, we had naysayers, and the "it will never happen" commentators. Some people were looking at Fletton Quays as just remaining as a pretty picture on an office wall without it becoming something that we can actually enjoy today. Worse comments, we would bankrupt the city. I mean, come on, Fletton Quays. Our planning officers and the then committee members, however, could see our shared vision, our passion to regenerate this derelict site, which had, for so many years had been a stain on the riverside beauty of our fair city, overlooking our magnificent ancient cathedral, has been mentioned on a number of occasions this afternoon. Have you seen what happened since? Of course we have, because we're here now. Peterborough Investment Partnership enabled Fletton Quays and San Martin House, several hundred riverside apartments, offices, luxury Sky Bar, Hilton Hotel, etc., etc., etc. That's where we are today. Well, what's next? Well, what's next is Northminster. The proposal before you all today. It's an unloved city centre site, as has already been said, which has been included in our local plan for regeneration. It's included in the local plan, for which we have another vision. and another passion, I have to say, to create what's right for Peterborough. This is an outliner application. It's our blueprint for this area to be rebuilt and transformed into a stunning new development of up to 315 affordable living apartments. And it's already been explained to us this afternoon what affordable living means in MPPF terms. We have public realm improvement. We have car parking. We have retail. It's a great place for people to live, to grow, to prosper within high specification 1, 2 and 3 bedroom departments, townhouses, maisonettes, 2 commercial units, courtyard, public open space and 50 car parking spaces, as I've said, with electric vehicle hookup potential. Over the last few years, we've shared our vision. We've shared our plans with many and varied consultees. We've set out our stall early on this process to be as transparent and as open as we could possibly be. Myriad meetings, shared views, negotiations and debate. Historic England, the Dean of Peterborough Cathedral, an open public exhibition in our cathedral, our transport and housing teams, our conservation teams, and many other interested commentators, both inside and outside this council, and from all walks of life. If you approve this proposal this afternoon, we hope to be on site early in the new year, regenerating a tired part of Central Ward, adding to the vibrancy of our city centre, introducing an additional consumer spend in Peterborough, estimated by professionals, not me, by professionals, to be some £6 million per annum knock-on spend for our existing and new businesses. Our proposal is NPPF compliant, National Planning Policy Framework compliant, for affordable housing provision. It's within an allocated site in our latest, recently adopted local plan, and after altering the design, it has no objections from either Historic England or the Council's Heritage Officer. After examination, our officers are recommending approval. And very significantly for this brand new development, the Dean of Peterborough Cathedral and PIP are in discussions to provide a heritage link. Very significant. Members, you've listened to the officer's address and recommendation. I hope you had the chance to study the report and to see the opportunity for the future of this important part of our city centre. We now have, as a cross-party membership, to the ability to approve this application in line with our officer's recommendation. We're very happy to take questions, but I wondered if Howard Bright has anything further to add. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you. I'll be brief, Peter, of which I'm sure the committee will be grateful. I'm a Peterborough lad born and bred. I've had the privilege of leading the development of Fletton Quays for the last 5 years. It's not very often you get the chance to alter a city skyline for what's the better, and that's what we've done with Fletton Quays, and the job up to us now is to do the same thing with Northminster for the benefit of the city, for today, for tomorrow, for the coming, I think somebody mentioned, the next 100 years. That's a privilege for us to be able to take this forward, and I hope you will agree that Northminster sets a good standard for what can be achieved in that part of the city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I've got here, Mr. Good, did you want to offer anything else before time's up?
I'm actually working here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think all I would add really, just in response to Mr. Martin's comments in relation to policy compliance, obviously what we've put forward is in all shapes and forms policy compliant in relation to the proposed uses. We've deliberately, it's a conscious decision not to include a huge amount of commercial or retail floor space in there. I think everyone will be well aware of the situation in most city centres. They actually tend to be retracting rather than expanding, so to put something else in the market which competes with the city centre is not necessarily a good thing to be looking at right now. In relation to the parking comments, I think it's probably worth adding that the policy does seek zero parking, so by providing the 50 spaces, we're actually technically beyond the level that we should be providing. A similar point that was made in relation to Solstice, so it's a question of trying to get that balance right. PIP have committed to having electric vehicle charging points, so it's an exceptionally sustainable scheme. Sustainable in relation to the electric charging points, but also where it is and the access to all the transport nodes that Peterborough provides. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, any questions? Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Forgive me if I've forgotten, but the 50 parking spaces that you mentioned, how will they be allocated? Will they be open to the public? Will it be what will they be used for, or who will they be used by?
They won't be open to the public. They will be private for the development, and it's a little early in our process to determine exactly how they'll be carved up according to for the residents in there. But they will be, if not public parking spaces, they'll be for the development only.
Yeah.
Do you foresee any problems in 300 places and 550 parking spaces?
I think it's important to bear in mind, it's a great question. It's a question I asked when we initially talked about Northminster, and sort of put all the balls up in the air and see where they landed from a specification point of view. And I think you have to bear in mind that I'd like you to bear in mind that people make choices. People make choices about where they live, where they buy to live. And if you are looking at renting, occupying a city centre apartment, you know full well whether it comes with a car parking space or not. That's your decision as a resident. So I think we wouldn't be, it's not a lottery who gets a parking space and who doesn't. It would be very clearly delineated, I feel, that these apartments come with parking spaces, these don't, whatever. So it is up to the renter, it's up to the tenant to determine whether he or she wants a parking space or doesn't. Moreover, given that the planning policy determines that we don't have to provide any parking spaces, let's make that quite clear, ladies and gentlemen, the provision of 50 parking spaces with electric hookups, I think, is more than we should do, inverted commas. But it is city centre, so we have an excellent transport network. We've got the railway station is literally a short walk away. So let's take this, I think, in the round. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Hussain?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just wanted to thank Sylvia and the team and the PIP partnership for a comprehensive presentation. It's well thought out, put together, and the list that Councillor Hill has given us of consultation, and it's obvious that they've taken time to plan this and talk to a lot of different people and departments. As mentioned, by someone else, I'm obviously Peterborough born and bred as well, and we want to see.
Councillor Hussain, this is questions.
Sorry, yeah. So it was just the question I was going to come to was part of on page 59. It mentioned about public open space. So it says in line with LP policy LP21, the contributions that were going to be made. If this is approved, when would those contributions be made? What process or time?
Yeah, whichever one he wants to answer, if you know the answer.
Do you want me to come in here? Okay.
I mean, it can be a question to officers, if not afterwards, but if you can answer that question for us.
I think I'll probably say the same as the planners, but that this the trigger for the delivery of the contributions will be set out in initially the section 111, but it will form part of the section 106. So that'll all be set out when that delivery happens. There's different elements of open space, so I guess there needs to be a discussion as to what comes first and how those triggers happen. It would normally be, we would prefer on occupation, because that's when the pressure starts coming on the existing open space. But that's a discussion to be had as part of the section 106.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I will. I would. I bring Sylvia in to reaffirm from an officer's point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, the triggers will be part of a further discussion after this meeting when we finalise the provisions within the Section 106 agreement. You've heard the applicant say they would prefer it on occupation of development. Quite often the council would prefer that the payment to be earlier on commencement of development. That's something that we will need to agree. So that's for the payment of the monies. As to when the works would actually start, once the money comes to the council normally has 5 years within which to carry out those works. So we couldn't say exactly when they would be carried out, but it'd be for the council to do that.
Okay, you've got another question, Councillor Sam?
Sorry, it's probably for Sylvia as well then. It's just, you mentioned about, reserve matters. So the finish of the building and the upper level, so will that then be a further consultation later on as well?
Yes, that's correct. Any reserve matters applications we receive go through public consultation process, both with local residents and with consultees.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any questions? Councillor Hogg?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I don't feel quite so silly asking this question, as it was detailed that this is a new style of renting. I just wanted to kind of drill down into how it works. Where do you get your renters from? Is it just through kind of advertising through agents on the private market, or will some of that go through the Peterborough Housing Department in terms of allocating people on the list?
This is affordable private rent, and so applications, and I'll stand to be corrected by my colleagues, but applications would be sought for people wishing to rent these apartments from the private sector. It could be you. So that's how we rent these apartments. It is policy compliant from an MPPF, and I think the local plan is quiet on this from memory. But could you offer any further detail for Councillor Hogg?
I'll agree with what my learned colleague has just said. It's not going to be confined to a particular group. It's going to be widely available. The intention is to make this type of housing more affordable and more accessible to everyone, including, of course, as Peter says, yourself, so that the maximum benefits can be... We're not picking on you, Councillor Hogg.
So essentially, whilst it won't look to reduce the housing list that we currently have, what it might do is be attractive enough so that people that are currently on the list may decide to go and join this enterprise, or look to take the offer up that you are offering on a private basis. So it wouldn't actually take people off the list as such, but actually the effect would actually reduce the list somewhat, because people would go, oh, actually we can afford this, so we don't need to be on the list any longer. Is that kind of a fair summary?
Yes.
Yeah, come on.
I did have another question. So, you mentioned about the electric parking. Will you be looking to put like maybe solar panels on the roof of the development in order to maybe mitigate some of the the costs of the internal lighting and car parking, etc.?
We are looking at, as Sylvia said in the early part, this is an outline application, so there's a lot of detail to develop for the RM. We are looking at a range of sustainability options, and funnily enough, I was with a tier 1 contractor. We were discussing about the build just last week in Birmingham, and one of the things that came up is the questions around solar panels, how we can incorporate them into the development. It's not for me to say right now that's how we're doing it, but we are looking at doing that actively because it's an obvious mitigation.
I think just adding to that, absolutely, that this is an outline application. The reserve matters determines a lot of that detail. What I would say to in answer to that question, Councillor Hogg and members, is that these apartments will be built to a particularly high standard, not just from a specification point of view, but also from an energy efficiency point of view. That point needs to be made very clear, but that is a reserve matters application.
Okay, Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I mean, you covered off earlier pretty comprehensively some of the challenges from the objectors in relation to parking. One of the other points that was made was around servicing from the highway. I just wondered if you could explain what you think that objection relates to, and how you might have covered that off.
In answer, good question, and you're right, it has been raised by objectors. I think what you have to bear in mind, please, is this is a city centre site. It isn't a development on a brownfield site somewhere in the middle of wherever. It is a city centre site, and of course the physical constraints aren't easy often. And so sometimes it's a little bit of a compromise. I believe our highways guys are okay with that, but perhaps you just confirm that, Howard.
The only thing I was going to say, which Peter's sort of picked up, is that we've worked with highways fairly extensively throughout this process, and as I understand it at the moment, there are no highways objections to what we've submitted. There will, of course, be other matters we deal with as part of the RVM.
Can I just add on that one as well? So the highways engineers have withdrawn their objection following the submission of additional information dealing with servicing, as you've heard through the presentation. It's also worth pointing out the market's there at the moment. A lot of that is serviced from the road, and there's an awful lot more activity. We're proposing 2 commercial units, which is where the majority of the servicing requirements come from. Within the car park, there's a drop-off concierge area notionally for the apartments itself, so that would take pressure off the roads as well.
Okay. Yeah.
I just wondered if we could have highways view on the same point.
We can when we get to them.
Okay.
Yeah, can ask that
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Anybody else got any questions at all? Councillor Hogg.
Just on that, you say the market is serviced currently, but it's not serviced from the road. The vehicles come into quite a large area on site to service the market.
There is a servicing area around the back, but on the road as well, there's access directly to the market. There's areas set aside for deliveries.
I think you have to bear in mind the market won't be there.
Well, I mean, this is true, but he was saying that it's currently serviced, and that's, so there's no change to the number of vehicles that would be on the roadside, is the point. So I did actually have a question, and the question is around the food bins. It's kind of unclear. Maybe I've read it wrong. I don't know. So apologies if this has been answered inside the pack. But are we talking about individual bins for each apartment, or are we talking about commercial big, kind of wheelie bit, sort of the four-wheeling bins that they use for some flats? And specifically, is there provision for food bins, for instance, food waste bins?
I would say to you, Councillor Hogg, that's a reserve matters issue, but I defer to my learned colleague, but as far as I'm aware, that's a reserve matters issue.
Correct, it is a detailed matter. We have been looking at it, obviously, because while this is an outline application, there's an awful lot of work done to make sure that all these things can physically be accommodated. I believe there's a condition. I was just trying to rifle through my pack here to find the condition, but I'm fairly sure that there's a condition that addresses the need for that additional information.
Okay.
I shall keep those questions for the officers.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, we'll go to questions to officers. So who would like to start that? Councillor Sharp, do you want to ask yours about highways, and then we'll come to you, Councillor.
Yeah, just reiterate my question. If you could clarify your thoughts on the point I made to the supporters in terms of servicing from the highway.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Sharp. The servicing arrangements from Northminster. There's been some off-site improvement works secured. The improvement works includes the provision of some loading bays along Northminster, and they're located in the sort of the bin collection areas. And there are some amendments required to the on-street parking bays along Cattle Market Road to allow for servicing along that road as well.
Yeah, still got something.
So in your view, it's not going to increase the impact on the area?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg, you had a question?
Okay, so, sorry, I have a couple of questions. So just kind of going back to this thing about the waste bins, that have food bin waste been incorporated into the size of the food bin stores, and also that there is the possibility of, in time, but much in the same way that back in the day where we used to have one bin, we now have 3, potentially 4 bins per household. That there may well be a separation of recycled waste, so there may be an additional bin to incorporate into waste collection. So have these things been incorporated in, specifically the food bin, which is something that is a current situation that we are looking to increase the recycle, well, not recycling, but the collection of food waste for. I think we send it to Hertfordshire to be burnt at a substantially less cost than having to put it into to landfill.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think that's been explained before. This is an outline application, therefore only access is considered in detail. However, we are attaching a large number of conditions to this permission, should it be granted. And condition 38 in the report requires a waste management strategy to be submitted to the council that would include details of servicing as well as the collection and disposal of waste. So through that condition, we would expect to see detailed information about all the different issues that you just raised and how they would be accommodated, because the development would need to fit in with the waste disposal arrangements that the council currently has in place. We would expect to see that adhered to. But it wouldn't be decided at this point. It would come through the determination of that condition.
Okay, just continuing on the theme of waste disposal, sorry. The report from Royal Haskinen about the turning circles for Cattle Market Road with a dumper truck, or the council waste to be able to go in and turn around. You've reduced the disabled parking provision by 2 metres, I believe. Does that mean, that presumably means that we're losing 1 parking space? It's gone. Is it from 3 to 2? No, it's not. So we've got an overly generous parking space there. It's just that even with that 2 metre reduction, it does look like the driver of the refuse vehicle would have to be very careful, specifically in an area where you've got a lot of pedestrians, potentially a parked car which may or may not be poking over the edge of where it needs to be. So I'm just worried about the fact that we're kind of mixing refuse trucks that are reversing in a highly pedestrianised area with potential parking in the way as well. It's putting quite a load onto the drivers to be able to do their job, professionally, obviously. But
if I may address that question, the applicant has demonstrated with swept path plans that a refuse vehicle can turn at the end of Cattle Market Road. That would require some adjustment to the disabled parking bays. There won't be any loss of disabled parking bays, and we will look at this in more detail at 278 stage, and we will look to amend the parking on-street parking bays accordingly, and as per the tracking details that are submitted at 278 stage. But if there's a requirement to relocate those disabled bays, then we will do that through that process and the TRO consultation process.
And just finally, one point. It was mentioned that they were looking to get on site early in the new year. How can that be achieved?
To be more specific, I suppose, the applicant also has an application in for prior approval of the demolition of the existing buildings on site. That's a separate application, and if that is to be granted permission, then that would enable the demolition of those buildings. You'll see that in a number of the conditions that we've written, the commencement of development wouldn't include demolition. So we've taken that out of the trigger for commencement of development. Therefore, that would enable the demolition of the market buildings to take place without triggering the need to comply with any pre-commencement conditions on this outline application.
Okay, so what you're saying is that there is a different application to demolish the market that is coming forward, and that would be looking to do that in the early part of the new year, even though the consultation doesn't end until the 21st of December. Is that correct?
Yeah, the process for relocating the market traders is something that's separate from the planning process. And then there is also the contractual land ownership arrangements between the council and the PIP over vacant possession. And so there are separate triggers that take place outside of the planning system. So those are not things that are necessarily covered by the planning application, but are under separate processes.
Okay, so is that something that only officers, this won't come to this committee in terms of deciding whether or not they are allowed to demolish the market?
That is a prior approval application, which means it has to be determined within a certain period. Janet, you may be able to help me out with the actual date of that, but normally that kind of application wouldn't come before committee because it looks at the method of demolition and the how the land would be left after that takes place, as opposed to the principle of it, which is being considered here.
Okay, so when the prior approval application was submitted, we have to respond to the applicant as to whether prior approval is needed for the method of demolition within 28 days of the application being submitted, which we have done. So we're now waiting for additional information.
Sorry, just to clarify, you've already given them permission to demolish the market?
No, we've advised that they need prior approval for the method of demolition to demolish the structures. It doesn't actually determine, we're not giving them permission to demolish the buildings. It's just the method of demolition.
I'm getting more confused. I'm sorry. I'm getting very confused by this.
I think Councillor Hogg would like to know when or what permission is needed to do the demolition, and who and when is that going to happen, and would it be a committee decision?
Yeah, so prior approval is a bit of a two-stage consent. So first of all, the council has to decide whether it requires prior approval of the method of demolition, and it has to do that within 28 days. So we have made that decision. We have said, yes, we would require to see details of how the demolition will take place. We've asked the applicant to provide further information on that, and then once that's submitted, we will then decide whether to approve or refuse that demolition, and that's going to take place within the next few weeks. We don't have a set deadline for it, but it will be within a few weeks rather than a few months.
Okay, so what you're saying is, although that the council has currently got a consultation with the general public on whether or not to close the market, which doesn't finish until the 21st of December, council officers will be determining whether or not the council is able to demolish the market way before that date.
Okay, the consultation on the relocation of the market is something separate, and it's under separate legislation. I believe that all the current traders have been served notice to vacate the premises, so that is all underway. The consultation would be on so they could be removed from the site, but the consultation is taking place on where the new market would be located, and that is underway. The timescales for the implementation of that is so that the new market would be up and running at some point after they have vacated, but within, I think, the springtime of next year. So we are anticipating a planning application for the new market within the next couple of weeks, and then we'd be looking to determine that in around January. But they're all sort of separate processes that, yes, they're interlinked, but they're not necessarily reliant on, well, they are reliant on each other to some extent, but it won't prevent you from determining this planning application.
No, okay, I get that. I get that. It's just it's deeply worrying to me that as a council we're giving somebody consent to demolish something that hasn't been agreed as to where it's moving, why it's moving, and you know what the details are, and whether or not the market traders are happy with that move, whether or not the general public are happy with that move, and by giving that permission for demolition, we are facilitating it's a kind of putting a gun to the head of saying, well, actually, it doesn't matter because we've got permission to knock this down.
Councillor Hogg, it's not actually to do with this application.
Yeah.
I know where you're coming from. I absolutely understand, but we're going off what you're here. None of the committee can determine that today.
Okay.
What you're asking to be determined today is this outline planning application. All the rest of it, obviously, has kindly been explained, and I know it's a complicated system, but it can't make your judgment today for you. Your judgment is on the outline planning application before you and what you've heard and anything else you want to hear, of course. Anybody got any other questions for officers? You're all clear on that?
Could I make one point?
Yes, if you want to make a point, please do.
Yep. I just wanted to assist the committee in the discussion about the car parking provision for the development. I'd just like to draw your attention to a number of conditions that we've attached. Condition 31 requires the submission of a car park management plan. Condition 39 requires the submission of a travel plan, and new condition 43 would require the provision of travel packs for new residents. So all these measures are to ensure that the car parking would be properly managed and that those residents without cars are encouraged to use public transport and so on. So those sorts of things are built into the conditions of the application and have been considered.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I think I'll ask a question as well. In your presentation, you said that the Secretary of State will call the application in. Can you just expand on that? Why would the Secretary of State call that in?
Okay, in quite rare circumstances, a Secretary of State may decide to call an application in for their determination. If that happens, then the decision is taken out of the hands of the local planning authority and is made by the Secretary of State. They would hold a public inquiry, an inspector would oversee that. They would make a recommendation to the Secretary of State, who could then decide whether to accept that or not. That's usually done for the sort of the largest, most controversial, most significant schemes in the country. There is provision for organisations or private individuals to make a request to the Secretary of State to have them consider whether or not to call an application in. We are not told who makes that call-in request, and after you as the committee have come to a resolution, then we would inform the Secretary of State of that, and then they would have a number of days, I think it would be 21 days, to formally decide whether or not to call the application in or not. But at this point, we don't know any further. If he did decide to call it in, then he would need to give the reasons for that, and that would become clear at that point.
Okay. All done there? Okay. Moving on then to debate. Who would like to start debate for us? Councillor Hogg.
Okay. So this is, it's a difficult one because there's multi-factors in play here. I must admit that coming in, I had various questions that I needed answering from what was in the pack and the information that was in the pack, and largely a lot of those sort of reservations or areas that I wanted to find out more detail on have been covered off actually. I think that this the application in terms of the fact that it's an affordable rent or 80% of market rate rent, I think sits nicely into the housing need for Peterborough. I think we're all more than aware that there is as other cities, we're not alone in this, that there is a desperate need for more housing, and that we have a lot of people who are in a position of not being where they want to be, to continue, to live their lives the way they want to live them. So I think this has got is a great kind of provider. This is a new kind of innovative way of looking at people's housing needs. So I think, and I was worried about the parking spaces, specifically on the basis that if it had been people that were on the housing list that were, you get 2 shouts and then you go back down to the bottom of the list. That as it's rightly said, if you know that the flat doesn't come with a parking space, and it's appropriate for you, that you don't need a car, you haven't got a car, you're not going to get a car, you work in the town centre or you commute to London or whatever it may be, then I can understand that's fine. I think that other parts of the city where there's parking issues, but that they're housing association flats, where it's like, this is where you're going. That can be very difficult if you've got a car and it causes problems. So I think, as far as the parking's concerned, I'm that's been covered off. It's a big tick for me. I am worried about the market. I'm worried about the fact that this huge amounts of planning has gone into this this endeavour, and I feel that the market has been left as a kind of an afterthought, really, almost like it's like, well, we'll push that back to the City Council to deal with, and I think there are ongoing plans to make a provision for the market, but those plans are still very much in the kind of planning stages. They're not really firming up. I think there's issues around it was intimated before about the design of the huts, whether or not they'll be made of wood, whether they're going to be made of metal, the security aspects, etc., etc. And I know that is another matter, but from my point of view, that this development at the moment seems to be pushing the market out, as opposed to the market being provided for, moving away, saying, yeah, thanks, it's been great, it's all yours now. And I just feel that this is maybe, we need to sort the market out before we kind of say, yes, this is great. So I have big concerns about the market. I've rightly or wrongly, I think it's something that as councillors we should be looking to protect. I'm not saying that's not the case. That there are clearly plans moving through for what's going to happen with the council, making the relocation, but I think they are not advanced enough or firm enough for us to be able to say that's a done deal. The fact that this is described as the former Peterborough Market and car park site, I think is getting ahead of itself. It is the current Peterborough Market site, and until such time as that market has got a proper provision ready for it, we've heard that there may well be a demolition order going through
within weeks for the early part of the year. And, you know, with the consultation, you know, only just launched really, and running until the end of December, I'm really concerned that, you know, again, we have this situation where a public consultation is it really a public consultation, or has everything been decided already, and, you know, we're just going through the motions. So on that basis, my conscience is telling me that I can't approve as it stands because of that element of what is going to happen with the market. I think it's part of our heritage, and I think it's really important to the citizens of Peterborough that we protect our market. And I think that allowing this to go through today would not be sending out that message. But I'm, you know, still willing to hear what other people have to say in that regard.
People have got to say, yeah, I'm sure. Okay, Councillor Hussain, you can go first.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for jumping the gun earlier.
That's all right. You were a Peterborough lad, you were saying.
Yeah, sorry. So I'll come back to that in a minute. As far as I was aware, the decision to move the market has already been made. And the current consultation is about where the market's moving to, not about it staying where it currently is. From my understanding of what the officers were saying about the demolition order that you just mentioned, I don't see it that they're talking about demolishing the market. I think as a business or investors, what they're trying to do is move ahead. So have all their eggs in line. So have a method of demolition, as they've said, agreed by the council, so when the green light's given they can move ahead with it. So I don't think it is to demolish the market and move it straight away. It's just to say, look, let's have it agreed how it's going to be done. When the time's right and the green light's given, then we can demolish. So coming back to Peterborough lad, I do want to see an improvement in that area. Whenever I go out of town, people mention that the one thing they recognise was the passport office, and the one thing that they always see there is the old market, and that's what they see as their first point of knowing Peterborough, and then the cathedral. So I think that part of the city does need improving, and it needs a massive improvement. Other cities do have, nice markets within the city. Retail within the city has been struggling in the last years, especially because of the pandemic, and I think the idea of moving the market closer to the rest of the retail avenues within the city will push more public and bring investment back into the city and improve the street scene. So for me, I think the proposal, as I said, I think they've done a brilliant job presenting it. I think the investors and the plans they've put together have been really well thought out. There's good consideration for the surrounding buildings and the Peterborough Cathedral. So for myself, I think I would be more than happy to support this proposal.
Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Being the ward councillor or central ward, I want to welcome this scheme. I think it's an excellent scheme. I think what members need to acknowledge is that this is an outline application. There are some matters that are reserved and will be subject to further consultation and planning application. Councillor Hiller used the word unloved part of central ward. I will say is an unloved part of the Peterborough city. Obviously, city centre forms the entire city, and regeneration is really required in that area. Looking at the scheme, I personally think it's a high-quality scheme which will provide affordable housing. The scheme will have no impact on the conservation area, no impact on the highway. As rightly said, that because it's in the city centre, there's a policy, the policy seeks zero parking. However, they are providing 50 parking, and as rightly a question was asked and rightly answered by Councillor Hiller, that the people who are going to occupy the flat, they will know prior whether they will get parking or they won't have parking. The most important thing that I think I would like to give weight to is the civic society who have withdrawn their concerns. I highly value them, always take their views on board, and their withdrawal of objection, I think, really supports the schemes and has made my life very easy. Thank you very much. So again, by listening to the civil society's concerns, clearly shows the applicant has the ear to listen, and they want to amend their plans, which they have done accordingly. In terms of the market, Councillor Hogg, I'm the representative of this ward. Market is like in the centre of my heart. As far as I understand, and I've raised this on a previous scrutiny committee, that the locations of the market have been discussed. A lot of areas have been looked into, and the area they've looked at, I think, is quite acceptable to me. And you know, there's work being done on market. It's not the way that I would say it's been totally abandoned and there's nothing being done on it. And I think we should not put much weight on the market when deciding this application. That's a separate issue, which I'm sure is being dealt with officers, and it will be scrutinised and when the time is right. So, as far as I'm concerned, Chair, I'm fully supporting this scheme. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Sharp, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in the objections that were raised, I noted 3 principal points. One was around the market position, one was around the servicing from the highway, and one was around parking. During the questions, I think we covered off the servicing from the highway. And as Councillor Egbers just been through, I think we've covered off the parking. But also, as referred, coming back to Councillor Hogg's comments around the market position. From my perspective, my understanding from what the officers have said, it's a completely different legal position. It's different legislation. It's not relevant directly to this application and the consideration of the application, albeit it's important, and I think we will fully support the relocation of the market. It's already been committed to, as I understand it, and the consultation is simply about relocation. Understandable, there's some concerns around timing, but unless somebody tells me different, I'm not sure it's relevant in terms of this application from a legal perspective. So I'm not sure we can really consider it. And on the basis of that, I can see no objection to supporting the approval of the application.
Okay. Councillor Warren.
Yeah, with this application, I had quite a few concerns around the cathedral views and how that would impact it, how the impact of the bearing of the application will be for the local area, the character of the development, and how the reduction of parking will be from 100 to 50 spaces. All my questions and all my reservations have been asked. I think this is a really kind of exciting, nice plan for a really unloved part of Peterborough. I think as a planning committee we need to get behind this scheme and look at this as being a quite exciting development for this part of Peterborough. I understand the concerns about market, but I think this is going to help the market move into a more exciting location and increase footfall for traders. So I'm more in favour of going the application and supporting this very nice application.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's more or less all been said. All I want to add to that is, well, as take on board Councillor Hogg's slight concerns about the market. Councillor Sain, I think, has addressed, and everybody else has addressed those. And in all conscience, how can we vote against affordable housing in this part of the city? And I think it looks great. I'm going with it.
Councillor Dowson.
Yes. People have mentioned how it might be helpful for the situation for housing in Peterborough. I'm wondering, with other schemes which we've had before us, where the attractiveness has attracted a lot of people from outside of Peterborough, from London especially, and we talk about affordable housing and how it would help local people, but I would have liked to have seen some safeguards within the proposals which would have given a priority to local people. I know we're in a commercial world, but I do feel that the Peterboroughans who might have rented and taken this opportunity of a good scheme might be outpaced by external factors, people who view their housing situation in London and then view it in Peterborough and how attractive a scheme is. Is there any way we could have put some safeguards in to give a priority to local people?
We've gone past questions, but I'm going to let it come because I think it's a good question, to be fair, and I think it should be answered. So, would you like to answer that, Mr. Mann?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It is an issue that we have considered when we were looking at the application. Because the scheme is a buy-to-rent scheme, it does fall under a sort of a different type of affordable housing, and it is private rent, and therefore that is open to sort of anybody. There are restrictions in the guidance that apply to it. That's the seek to sort of dissuade local authorities from putting nomination rights and such like on this type of development, because it's not a social rented product, it's private rent, which is slightly different. And so, having looked at the government guidance and in the absence of any specific policy that we have within our local plan, we've not felt that it would be reasonable to put such restrictions on this particular scheme.
Thank you for the answer. Okay, is there anybody else? Yes, Councillor Hogg.
I just wanted to clarify for members. The public notice that has gone out is inviting representations regarding the closure of Northminster Market. So it's not saying that it has been decided that the market is moving. It is asking members of the public for their opinions as to the closure of Northminster Market. And I just think that we are putting the cart before the horse in terms of deciding to basically demolish the market before such time as we've finished listening to members of the public as to what they would like to see from our city market.
Anybody else? I'll come in at that one. Could I go straight back at Councillor Hogg with that one? There is no plan in this to demolish the market. You're jumping the gun there again. That's a different thing, as I brought up earlier. So that can't be used as a reason in this, because that's not in this representation, is it? That's a separate thing. They are linked. But, well, you can use it, but I don't think it's a good enough reason, because I'll give you an example, and you should know and I'll remind you as an experienced person on the committee. And this isn't being flippant. This is a very straightforward, a layman's terms. If you were to buy a property, sorry, not buy, but you were looking at buying a property and you wanted to put an extension on it, there was nothing, and it's quite right, that you can actually apply for planning permission on that property, yeah, even though you don't own it. And there's no onus on the owner to sell it to you. My suggestion is this works in the same way. The council need to know, and the developer needs to know, where can you go with this? Now, at the end of the day, if we say no, irrespective of whether the market moves, then it doesn't happen, does it? It's, you know, and I know, do you see where I'm coming from a straightforward point of view? They're asking the question. The question's being asked. This is what we propose to do on that, if we can do the market side. If that comes back, that consultation, imagine if that came back and said, no way is that going to move. They're in a sticky situation, because although they've got planning permission, if we agree, the public don't support it. That's a different issue. So I think we need to come back to that. I don't understand your point, but I don't think we know the answer from the public yet, and nobody does. Going back to my own side of it, I think, me too. I'm a Peterborough boy. I'm born here, and I can't remember the market in the Cathedral Square. Damn it! All right, I'm just a little bit too young, maybe, but I do remember the market when it was a proper cattle market. You know, with the proper cows and sheep and pigs, etc. I remember all that. And I do remember when the market started up fruit and veg there when I was very young. And as I grew older, I always thought to myself, why did they put it here? Why did they move it out of the city centre? I don't understand that. I don't understand that. And to this day, I do not understand why we moved the market away from the main city centre. No, and I've never really had that question answered. Now, to me, as we're going to talk about the market, relocating that market back into the heart of the city, where you will get the footfall, I think it was just mentioned over here. Yes, there will be some things they've got to sort out. They've got to sort out what type of shelters, etc. they are, and I know there are issues like that, but again, that doesn't affect us here. We also have to remember that the scrutiny committee that sat and looked at this unanimously adopted the idea of moving the market to the city centre. So it's been scrutinised at the first stage. Yes, it's set out to consultation. I have also been told, I've been made aware that we already know the commitment of the council is to move the market into the city centre. And Rob Hill, as you've said, Officer Rob Hill, has basically gone on record in an email to say that will be by the end of the March. That's what they hope to do. Obviously, we don't know the full implications, but that's the actual aim is move the market, city centre, by the end of March. But of course, consultation might turn around and say, we don't want that to happen. Now, I can tell you from my own point of view, and those of you all councillors, you've all been out in your wards, almost every person I speak to thinks it's a good idea to move that market. So it's immaterial, but in my view, it's a fantastic idea to do that. Then we're left with a piece of land, aren't we? With nothing happening to it. An old demolished car park, a market which will no longer function. So why not ask now, if that happens, do we build this on it? Are you happy to build that on there if that market is moved away? And that's really what we're asking today. What the council are asking you is an outline permission to do that. Reserved matters will come later on that spot if all that goes there. The market's moved, all the rest of it. I have no doubt if the market doesn't move and and people don't allow it to move, you can't do it. But that's not what we're asking you. It's if it happens, is this good enough for you? Would you agree to the outline permission on this spot if the market's gone? That's how I see it. And in which case, 100%, I think it's a fantastic scheme. I think they've listened, they've done everything they can. I think from an objector's point of view, they've listened to what the objectors have said. Historic England, Civic Society changed their plan to try and suit, and now they've withdrawn, which I think is a sort of nod in the right direction, a tick in the box, you've done the right thing. I would suggest that we go with this, we give this our support, and we develop that area so as it's a fantastic area again, where people want to go and people want to stay. Councillor Iqbal, you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great help. That shows where experience, plays its effect. That's a very good explanation. I think everybody must have understood that. In terms of market, I'd just like to add, as you rightly said, I was part of the scrutiny committee and the market issue was raised there, and I did ask questions were there any alternative locations, and this location was the best location fit for the purpose, and it was adopted. So it was challenged, and it's on that basis that I was saying that yes, we have found a location where at scrutiny level we did accept it, that this is the right location and work needs to be done on it. If that's the case, then I'm happy to propose in favour of the officer's recommendation.
Just to make sure there's no more debate before I move to that. Nobody else is coming in, so yeah, I'm going to go for the proposal then, if no objections to Councillor Iqbal.
I'm happy to go in support of the officer's proposal to grant the application.
And do you have a seconder, please? Councillor Brown. All those in favour? Against? And abstentions? 2 abstentions. Okay. Would you like to read out the result, Dan, when you're ready?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's 8 in favour of the recommendation to approve the application as officers recommended and 2 abstentions. Okay,
in that case, the application is approved. Thank you very much. Thank you, committee. Thank you for all your input. I was saying Councillor Hill is coming back. I was going to say, make sure we get him back. I think you've sat there long enough. I think we'll give you till past for a toilet break. Don't forget you're still in live session, so please discuss the next 2 items. Thank you. Everybody back? Yes, we're all back. Okay, welcome back everybody. We'll move on now to item 5.2. This relates to 197 Crowland Road, I Green, pages 77 to 90 in your packs, and will be presented by Mr. Harding.
Yep, thank you very much, Chairman. If we go to the first slide. So the application site is edged in red on the picture before you. What sits on site currently is a static caravan with a brick-built amenity building on the site. Planning consent was granted for one Gypsy and Traveller pitch to be provided on the site back in 2014, and it's remained on site, albeit it has been refreshed in recent years. And the application before members today is to replace that static unit with a brick-built dwelling, still to be used by a Gypsy and Traveller family. So this next slide shows the location of the site in respect of the settlement boundary of I Green as identified in the Peterborough adopted local plan. And because it sits outside of the settlement boundary, the site in question is said to be in the open countryside, though I do appreciate that there are buildings around the application site, but in terms of the local plan it's deemed to be within an open countryside location. Thank you, Dan. So this is the existing site plan, as you can see, with the static unit in the centre of the site, and the small oblong at the top of the picture is where the brick-built amenity building is. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed dwelling that's going to go on the site. Next slide. And this is the elevation drawings. As you can see, it's a 1.5 storey dwelling that's proposed. Next slide. These are the side elevations. Floor plans, ground floor, and first floor plans as well. We move to the pictures of the site. So this is the entrance off the Crowland Road. You can see on the right hand side of the site the brick-built amenity building, and the sort of static deeper into the site, which is laid to gravel significantly with lawns to the rear. Next slide, please. This is looking away from I Green towards the Crowland direction, with the application site on the left hand side. Next slide, please. This is looking back the other way, with the application site on the right hand side. Next slide, please. This is the unit that's currently on the site. You can see just behind there, there's a patio area, a grassed area as well, showing the gravel that covers the majority of the site. Next slide, please. This is a reverse view, so looking at the rear elevation of the static towards the entrance into the site that you can see in the background of the photograph. Next slide, please. This is the rear of the site looking towards the neighbouring properties. Next slide, please. And this is in front of the static caravan, looking towards the front of the site, looking at the neighbouring property that fronts Crowland Road. Is that the end? Yeah. And that completes the slideshow. As I mentioned, a planning consent was granted on the basis of this being a single Gypsy and Traveller pitch, excuse me. And in that occasion, the status as Gypsy and Travellers was confirmed to the local authority. The flood risk assessment test was passed. There wasn't a supply of pitches in Peterborough sufficient to meet the demand for pitches. There was no highway objection to the scheme, and in terms of location, whilst outside of the settlement boundary, it was sufficiently close to the settlement of Eye Green and Eye itself to make officers recommend approval for the use of the site as a single Gypsy and Traveller pitch, because you could get to the settlement by means other than a private car, and hence planning permission was granted for that scheme. In terms of the current proposal, we've got no issues with the design of the property itself, how it looks on site and its physical relationship with the neighbours. It doesn't impact on the amenity of any of the neighbours. There's no issues relating to flood risk, no issues relating to adequacy of car parking or access. This site centres on whether or not it's appropriate for us to approve a brick-built property in this location. Now, in accordance with your adopted local plan, given the open countryside status of the location, permanent residential dwellings should only be granted planning permission on limited circumstances, and within your local plan in relation to Gypsy and Traveller pitch sites, your policy says that plan permission should not normally be granted for brick-built properties on said sites, and this leads officers to put before you a recommendation of refusal in this instance. Officers do appreciate, and as I mentioned earlier, and as shown on the site visit and in photographs, it's not in a complete and utter open countryside location. There are residential properties adjacent to the application site, but as a matter of principle and in accordance with your local plan, it is identified as being an open countryside location. To date, no special circumstances have been put forward by the applicant which may cause officers to consider an alternative recommendation to you, and hence we are sticking with the recommendation of refusal of the application, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Harding. Okay, members, we've got firstly the Ward Councillor, Councillor Simons. Join us. Oh, you got it. Just to remind you. Good afternoon, Councillor Simons.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to committee. You'll have 10 minutes, if you require it, to address committee.
I won't need 10 minutes. Okay, I'd like to thank the committee for allowing me to speak today. The Smith family have lived on site for nearly 10 years now. The family and their 4 children are very settled in the area. I note the application has no objections from any officers that have been asked to comment on this application, although I understand the officer in charge has recommended refusal, which I understand, as we do not have a policy for this type of application in our local plan, resettlement of travellers. Having said that, LP 11 deals with a replacement dwelling in open countryside, but does not cover replacement of a mobile dwelling to a permanent dwelling. I mean, Mr Harding mentioned caravan, but as you can see if you've been on site, it's a bit more than a caravan. It's a fairly nice structure actually. I believe most of you visited, so you will understand what we're talking about. I also note the application has had 32 letters of support and 1 objection. The 1 objection is from the parish, objecting on the grounds of overdevelopment of the site. Well, I'm sorry, I can't agree with that, and I've told the parish my feelings on that. Okay, I'll sum up, I'll keep it brief. We do not have a policy on resettlement of travellers in our local plan. We do have a policy LP 11 for replacement of permanent dwellings in the open countryside, but not for mobile unit to permanent dwellings. I would ask the committee to consider the application carefully and support me in allowing this family that have settled to replace their mobile unit to a permanent property so they can fully integrate. I'm sure the applicants would accept any conditions the officers thought appropriate to bring to this application. Also, obviously, the environmental impact of a proper built house would be so much greater than a mobile unit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, questions? Councillor Hiller, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's good to be back. Just a quick question, Councillor Simons. When you just said the impact of a mobile home would be greater than that of a permanent home, and I have to say, looking at the photograph, it looked pretty permanent to me. But what exactly do you mean by that?
So can you just...
Yeah, and just the last piece of your address, you said the impact of a mobile home would be greater than the impact of a permanent home. And I'm assuming you're talking about an environmental impact.
No, environmentally, obviously, a lot more efficient brick-built to modern standards house than a mobile unit. That was what I was trying to say, sorry.
If I might, Chair. Looking at the plan that was shown, the replacement dwelling, for want of a better phrase, looked to be probably more than twice the size of the existing mobile home, in inverted commas. What is your thought about that? You don't have any problems with that?
No, I think obviously it's a family. They've got 4 children, and it'd be, they said to me, which I agree with, they'd love it. It'd be great if each child could have their own bedroom. There's a large, I've probably noticed, there's a large bungalow at the back, which obviously would dominant to that, and there's a large white house as is shown on the picture, completely next door, and both of the neighbouring properties support the application.
Anybody else? Yes, Councillor Dowson.
Looking at the picture here, I didn't visit the site, but that looks to me quite a neat and tidy location, and I would not want to deny the people this opportunity. I feel that the housing need is an important one. Sorry, it's not a question, but I feel a lot of sympathy for this application.
We'll remember that when we get to debate, Councillor Dowson, and take that on board. Thank you. I think we'll remember what you've said. Anybody else want a question for Councillor Simons? No? Councillor Simons, thank you very much. Okay, if I now call on Tim Slater and Kelly Smith, please. Please remember about disinfecting your mics before we start. Okay, good afternoon and welcome. Between you have 5 minutes to address committee when you're ready.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm really nervous.
Take your time, there's no rush.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Smith. I'm the applicant of the proposed planning. We've been at the property for nearly 10 years now, and up until March this year, we have lived in a 50-foot by 20-foot park home. The reason this had to be taken away was it fell into disrepair. This came to light when my son's school teacher became concerned he was unwell so much in class, especially with his asthma, and stressed he should be seen by a GP. Our doctor asked about our living arrangements as he wasn't getting better as time went on. As the home was made from wood, we'd done some investigating and found out it was in fact damp. We were midway through our planning application at this time and unsure what to do, but knew the home must go. We replaced it with a plastic single-unit static, but with us recently having our 4th baby, as well as 3 school-aged children, this was making everyday life tough and did impact my postpartum journey. We made the decision in May that my husband would sleep in the touring caravan with the eldest 2 children and me in the static with the youngest children, which isn't ideal. With my husband being from the travelling community and myself a non-gypsy, we have had to do a lot of compromising with our way of living. We do not travel much anymore with the children being settled in school, but still do travel in the holidays to culture-based events and horse fairs. We still wish to keep the status of our home, just to change from a static to a brick build. We have only ever lived here as a one-pitch family and do consider this our forever home. We just feel now, given our family size and the children longing for their own space, that this is our chance to settle more comfortably. I also myself really miss the everyday comfort a house brings. We are very much part of our community and received a lovely response from our neighbouring friends and even comments in support from people who we don't know, which is really kind. They've all expressed, and we strongly agree, that not only would a permanent sustainable dwelling be so much better visually, that it would be so much more energy efficient too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The inability of the planning system to meet the changing needs of people is a weakness. In my opinion, it's increasingly inflexible and poor at delivering solutions that can meet the needs of actual families as they change over time. Be that the desire to provide accommodation at a family home for an elderly relative, or in this case the desire of Mr. and Mrs. Smith to become more part of the local community with a permanent dwelling. As set out by Councillor Simons in his referral to committee, the restrictive and inflexible nature of LP 11 does not offer a ready mechanism for this to happen. It is accepted that the base permission on the site was for a mobile home. However, the planning merits of the permitted mobile home are in visual and impact terms very similar to the current proposal, and the current proposed dwelling would be much more attractive and sustainable to heat and run due to enhanced insulation and construction. Looking at the purpose of LP11, as explained in the supporting text, it is to protect the countryside from new development that would undermine its essential character or appearance. It is evident from the site that it is within a pocket of development close to the edge of the village. It is not visually open countryside. It is noted, as set out in the officer's report, there are no technical or policy objections to the proposal other than a conflict with LP11. So the planning harm identified in the reason for refusal is solely in respect to the wording of LP11, with all other material aspects of the proposal being considered acceptable. It is our contention that in real terms the proposal causes no harm to the intrinsic character or beauty of the countryside as compared to the current permitted use on site, and as such does not therefore undermine the planning purpose behind LP11. Therefore, in accordance with the MPPF, it is considered that other material considerations, i.e. no harm, are sufficient to outweigh the wording of LP11, and it is therefore requested that planning permission be granted. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, members. Do you have questions, please? No, thank you very much. Okay, we'll go to questions to officers then. Councillor Hiller.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If the members were minded to approve this dwelling construction, are there any circumstances where we could condition that this was a particular instance, a particular special case, a particular raison d'etre, if you will, a rationale as to why this dwelling, we felt as a committee, if indeed we did feel as a committee, that it should be allowed as an exception? I'm very, very conscious of certainly my attitude towards building in properties in open countryside, but that tends to be where it is genuinely open countryside rather than perhaps something like this, where with the best will in the world, you all right, it's a mobile categorization of dwelling that's there currently, but it ain't mobile by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it's not going anywhere, is it? And you've got a particularly nice, what I guess is known as a homestead, and these people that own this property as it stands, they're obviously very, very particular about where they live. I mean, it's immaculate. I mean, it's you've got a lovely brick-piered wall, you've got gravel finishing, and I noticed there was a hot tub with a gazebo over it, and an absolutely immaculate current mobile home, bespoke. So my question to you, roundabout way, is that if we did give permission for this to be turned into a permanent dwelling, is it going to set a precedent? That's my question.
Through you, Chairman. As the agent stated in his presentation to you, members of the committee could put some weight on the fact that, in his words, this is a pocket of development in the open countryside, and you could reach a conclusion reasonably that in that instance the harm that would be caused to the open countryside would be quite modest. So that's a conclusion that committee members could reach. What I would say is another material consideration for members is that generally speaking there is a aversion to living in bricks and mortars accommodation by the community, and therefore if this site were to be, inverted commas, lost to bricks and mortars accommodation as opposed to the use of touring caravans and statics, then the site wouldn't necessarily be available for other people in the community to take it on should the Smiths move on to a new location. Now, I fully appreciate that if you were to look at the travelling community as a whole, probably a good proportion of the community are going to be living in bricks and mortars accommodation, but that portion of the community isn't the one that isn't the part, should I say, that is difficult to provide for or more challenging to provide for accommodation compared to those that wish to continue residing in what I call temporary accommodation, i.e. statics and sort of touring caravans. So it is a sort of a balanced consideration that members would have to have in respect of that particular issue.
Anybody else got a question? Councillor Brown.
We mustn't forget that the 4 children would like to live with the parents and not be separated in another building. That was one of the reasons.
It was, but we haven't reached debate, but we'll take yours on as well. On board with me. Councillor Dowson's doing one. Councillor Hogg.
So I just wanted to clarify what you were saying was that by putting a brick building there, it would no longer be designated as a site for traveller use, albeit the fact that they've lived on this site for 10 years as one family. So essentially the fact that they've been there 10 years would suggest that they've taken it out of that market anyway, but because that they've been living there for 10 years.
Yeah.
Through you, Chairman. When we get a planning application for a Gypsy and Traveller pitch or pitches, then in the vast majority of cases they are located within the open countryside, and we deal with those applications in accordance with national and local policy. All other planning factors put to one side for a moment, if those people didn't have a Gypsy and Traveller status, then it's highly unlikely that planning permission would be granted for those developments. It's because of their Gypsy and Traveller status that permits them to have sites in locations which wouldn't normally get planning permission for residential development, and I use the word residential development in the broadest of contexts there. If the site were to have a brick-built dwelling put on it instead of the current arrangement, then as and when and if the site came up for resale, then whilst we could, as a planning authority, if we were to grant planning permission for it, put a condition on to say it can only be occupied by somebody from a Gypsy and Traveller community, the market for that property might be quite small, because the Gypsy and Travelling community, when looking for an open countryside location, are generally likely to have an aversion to bricks and mortars accommodation. I appreciate that I'm presenting that to you in a general sense with no facts and figures to put before you. But what I'm trying to do is to sort of illustrate a broad principle to committee members.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions on that, Councillor Hiller?
So, from what you've just said, Mr. Harding, it's similar to an agricultural tie, isn't it? In the sense that it is a very limited audience, but that audience has to justify why that build is necessary, and the market, the resale market, unless that tie is lifted, the resale market is very limited. So, am I right in suggesting that?
Through you, Chairman, yes, I think that's a reasonable analogy.
Any further questions? We'll go to debate then. Who wants to kick? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sains.
Just as a comparison, just to ask yourselves about whether you're familiar with the Oxney Road site in Peterborough, the Gypsy site. The reason I mention it is because I know that is a designated Gypsy traveller site, but there is brick and mortar buildings on that site. So when you said that, the traveller community would be, have some aversion from it, but there is some on that site. So it's obvious that they're not.
Yeah. Actually, Councillor wants to answer it, so let him answer.
The reason I asked, Joe, is that was at one time within my portfolio. There's no dwellings, no brick and mortar dwellings there. They are outhouses, washroom facilities, that type of thing. There's no dwellings there in Oxney Road or Norwood Lane, both of which are council owned, you'll be aware.
Okay, you don't want to end that there? No. Okay, fair enough. So we went to debate. I think Councillor Hogg put his hand up. So.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and through you. As far as I'm concerned, I understand where officers are coming from. The policy that we've got written down steers them towards that recommendation. The agent has said that essentially the planning is inflexible, and I think that's not entirely correct, because that's why we're here today. This is that provision to be able to flex that plan, as it were, for circumstances such as this, which, as far as I'm concerned, stands out far and above any kind of, just the way that the site looks, the circumstances around the family's current living arrangements, which, where the husband has to sleep in a separate caravan from the rest of the family. They've lived there 10 years. They've put their roots into the community in terms of changing, the children that go to the local school. I have no hesitation whatsoever fortunately, saying that turn down the officer's recommendation and basically allow this to go forward.
Okay, Councillor Hiller.
This is debate, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, we're in debate.
I agree with Councillor Hogg. I think this is an exceptional application and should be viewed as such. In that it ticks all the, sorry to be cliched, but it does tick all the boxes of an allowance for a dwelling to pretty much replace what ostensibly is a permanent dwelling. In name only, it's not a permanent dwelling, where it is currently. The 10-year tenure is relevant, in my opinion. The family circumstances is relevant, in my opinion. The settled, non-settled relationship between husband and wife, that's relevant, but not in planning terms. I get that. They could build a house there and sell it tomorrow. We've seen this, we've witnessed this as a planning committee over the years. However, it can be conditioned, I understand. It could be conditioned in that it can only be lived in, as I understand it from what Mr. Harding has said, by a recognised gypsy and traveller status family. Gypsy and travellers are an ethnic minority. You'll be aware of that, I'm sure. And certainly on that basis, if that's confirmed, and that could be conditioned, then I would be, again, sorry to be not unfortunately, fortunately, I would be reticent, I think, to accept the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I concur with Councillor Hogg and Hiller in what they've said as well. I mean, I did do the site visit with other councillors, and with the other buildings around there, I didn't see that there was a impact on the countryside, as was stated. The only concern I would have is, just coming back to maybe Councillor can sort of help me with this, or officers, as one part of the the husband is from the travelling community and the wife is settled, will that not cause then an issue with the restriction that you're wanting to put on there? Just
okay, anybody else? Would you like to just answer that for me, please, Mr.
Yep.
Nick?
Through you, Chairman. No, it wouldn't cause an issue, because the wording would cover the family as a whole. So that sort of concern you have wouldn't arise.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Sharp.
Yeah, sorry, so picking up on those comments, and this may turn back into a question, back Mr. Harding. If you did put that restriction in place, does that then satisfy the lack of exception from LP11? Because that's, as far as I can see, that's the only issue. It sounds to me like there's a lot of agreement in the room that the application makes sense, but
yeah,
that seems the only blocking point.
Yeah, through you, Chairman. I professionally would still have a concern about granting planning consent for a brick-built building, because that would have the effect, should the property become available, of not enabling a family that had an aversion to the use of bricks and mortars from being able to move on to the site. So by virtue of there being a brick building on the site, that would narrow the market as to who might be interested in it from a gypsy and traveller community perspective.
Yes.
If they chose to move into the building and not just utilise the land, is that correct?
Yes, that'd be correct, but obviously they would need consent for any static caravan that's going to be on there, separately from any permanent brick build consent that's been granted.
So just trying to go back to the question, if that recommendation was put in place, or that constraint was put in place, would we then be compliant with LP11?
Yeah.
Yep, through you, Chairman. The decision that you make, if it were to be to approve this development proposal, would be based on the committee's conclusion that the harm to the open countryside would not be so great, as would be the case if it was in a truly open countryside location, and therefore you could say that demonstrates the exception to the policy.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Iqbal.
Again, I think I've got a question. We're talking about the exception, and then we're talking about a condition. So, to bring this application within the exception, we have to have that condition. No?
The way, through you, Chairman, to think about it is to separate out the issue of the acceptability of the physical location, and then whether or not you wanted to put on a restrictive occupancy condition. So as it currently stands, the site is in an open countryside location, and what has been consented on site is solely for occupation of a gypsy and traveller family. So if committee was minded to grant planning permission, contrary to the policy in the local plan that says no, we're not going to allow permanent brick-built structures on gypsy and traveller sites in the open countryside, then your key reason for saying it is acceptable is because you're saying, well, whilst in theory it is in an open countryside location, in practice, because of the amount of physical development around it, it is actually less so. So it's not a true open countryside location, given the amount of built development around it. So that's the point one. And then the point two is, given that it was originally consented for occupancy by a gypsy and traveller family, then you should be bringing that forward and applying that occupancy restriction to any brick-built dwelling that's on the site as well.
Thank you. That clears it. Thank
Okay.
you.
Councillor Hogg.
So my personal opinion is I don't think we have to put that restriction on. I think, ultimately, I think that the family are quite settled on the site anyway. But at any time that they, life changes, that they may want to move on somewhere else. The kids grow up in a number of decades' time, and they may wish to move on. And I think that placing that restriction on them is, as rightly been said, it's if you put that restriction on, it means that you're closing that market down to just within the traveller and gypsy community. And as Bruby said, within that community itself, there will be a reasonable percentage of people that would not want to take up a site that had a brick-built residence on it, that's not something that they would want to do. And I think that would put too much of a restriction on the site for them. I think, personally, I would be happy for it to just go ahead as approved without that restriction. But see what other people have to say on that.
Councillor.
Yes, having agreed with Councillor Hogg, I now disagree with him. I think it's imperative that condition should committee be minded to permit this change of building, because it's replacing an existing building. I think that's what's important to me. It isn't new build in the open countryside. It is replacing an existing property, whether it's mobile or not, it's still a property. It's replacing an existing property within a homestead, quite a clearly delineated homestead. And I think that restriction should be placed, that condition should be placed on any new build. The market, of course, would be limited should the owners of that property decide at some time in the future to sell. But I think that's exactly the reason why we should condition it, because as I understand it, from listening to Mrs. Smith, it isn't the status, it isn't the lifestyle per se from an ethnicity point of view. It is the physicality of that property that they want to change. So in reaction to that, my attitude would be, yeah, I agree with you. What's proposed looks an attractive double-fronted property. What you've got there at the moment, I have to say, is very attractive for a mobile home. It's very attractive indeed. If you want to change that, that's fine, okay, but you will have this condition placed upon you, and I believe that's the right thing to do. It's almost a halfway house, if you will. Because I am very conscious of setting precedent with this type of thing, and it's all very well Councillor Hogg saying, well, give it to them, in almost in an arbitrary fashion. If they want to sell it sometime in the future, then fine, okay. But that's not what this is about. It's about improving a lifestyle, improving where it is they live, improving the roof over their head and the amenity, getting the family together under one roof. That's how I see this, and I see that comes with a restriction, it comes with a condition, and that personally is where I am at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor Dowson?
Bloody thing. Yeah, I think if I had that site and you were allowing me to put a house on the site, then putting a restriction upon that house, and it's cost me quite a few 100,000 plus for building, and then you put the restriction on, I would be strongly reserve my judgment on is it worth doing it, because they are investing their cash in a building which you are putting a restriction on for if they wish to sell it in the future, and I think that's grossly unfair. So I would be against any restriction.
Okay, anybody else? Councillor Brown?
I know this is nothing to do with it, but directly behind that fence, that chalet type bungalow that's behind there is a permanent residence. It's not a traveller's house, and that's just behind the fence of their property.
Okay. Councillor Heller?
Thank you, Chair. Only in as much as the scenario that's been painted by Councillor Dowson is an irrelevance, in my opinion. We are looking at what is there in front of us. It's not us as a committee or as a planning service that's saying, you know, this is where what we want to change and where it's going to be and how big it is. That is for the applicants to make that decision. It has got nothing to do with us as a local planning authority. I think that's a completely spurious comment. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sharp?
Yeah, just to come back to that, and it may be a need for points of clarity for my own benefit, because I thought I picked up earlier that the reason for having the restriction on the future use of the site remaining with the Gypsy and Traveller community, should we put a permanent structure on there, was because of the loss of available sites, in fact the reduction of sites across Peterborough, because we don't have additional sites. So I don't know whether that makes a question or a point of clarity back to the officer, because if so, if the same application or similar application came up in another location that was, say, in a rural area, the officers will be applying the same logic, and we're only talking about one family then, so we're not setting a precedent. What I'm trying to get at. So I'm struggling with what the reasoning is for the need of the restriction, and whether it does need it or not, because I understand Councillor Hiller's point, and I understand Councillor Hogg's point. So I'm struggling a bit of the reason for the need for the restriction. Is it simply because of the available locations for the Gypsy and Travel community, and actually you'd be reducing it by one? Sorry.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable question.
Through you, Chairman, thank you. The starting point is the only reason the pitch got planning permission is because a good case was put forward to justify a traveller pitch in this location. So it stands to reason that when and if you were going to grant planning permission for a replacement brick and mortar dwelling, then the same restriction should be put on that brick and mortar house. Think of it another way, is that if we got a planning application for a static caravan which was needed to support a brand new agricultural business, and temporary consent was granted, and after that temporary period it was demonstrated to us that that business was on a sound financial footing, there was a functional need for that dwelling, that residential occupancy on site to look after the farm, etc. If we were then faced with an application to build a brick and mortar dwelling to replace the temporary structure, then we would say on that consent that it needed to be used in association with the agricultural business, because the agricultural business justified us granting the temporary consent for the static in the first place. So it's about being consistent. If we didn't, in the case of this particular application, put an occupancy condition on, then the site would be absolutely lost for good in terms of being able to be occupied by the travelling community. Having said that, I appreciate that there would absolutely be nothing to stop a member of the travelling community purchasing the property, just like they could purchase any other property anywhere in Britain. You know, that's a given, isn't it? But as a traditional gypsy and traveller pitch that's safeguarded for that community, it would be lost forever if we didn't have that restriction on. So whilst I'm not keen on having a brick and mortar dwelling on that site, simply because it would cut out a good portion of the travelling community who don't like living in bricks and mortar, I think it's better to have something rather than nothing if committee is minded to grant consent today.
Okay, Councillor Sen, I think we've done this to death. Are we moving on to something else? Yeah, you can. All right.
Thank you, Chair. I think from listening to the family, their main need, or it's evident that they need a larger accommodation, and I think that's more important to them than whether there's a restriction or not a restriction. So in my mind, you know, it's halfway, but I think the important thing is to, you know, for me, that the family get the accommodation they need from the needs that they have. Whether there's a restriction or not, you know, we'll leave that, I suppose, in the motion.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Hogg.
I just have a kind of a procedural question. Are we able to ask the question whether or not people think it should be approved, and then ask a separate question as to whether or not we feel that there should be a restriction placed on it, or does it have to be
motion?
It has to be a motion without
or
with, and then if that gets defeated, then we try the other one.
Well, anything that gets defeated moves to anybody else who wants to throw a motion in, obviously. At some point we have to come to a decision, obviously, based on that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, anything else? No, I have to agree with Councillor. I think it does need to have that restriction. I think Mrs. Smith did a really good presentation. She made it very clear why the house or the bricks and mortar were needed for her children and to bring the family back together. And I think I understand officers' concern, and I have a concern that we effectively lose a traveller gypsy sort of area if we don't some way condition it. In other words, not that I'm saying you will, 2 weeks later you could put it on the open market and sell it as a normal freehold property, and we've lost the facility for any traveller and gypsy community as well. So I think the condition then keeps it that way. So in my view, yeah, I think everything's there. I know it's not quite to policy. I accept that. That's why we're here, as Councillor Hogg said, so as we can look at that and decide whether or not we think we can change policy a little bit or bend policy a bit. In my view, I would, but I would only do that on a condition that there was, it remained the only occupation could be basically a traveller or gypsy community. That's what I feel. Anybody else? I'm going to go for any motions then, or proposal. I've got one here and I've got one there, so I'm going to go for you and then we'll go for you, yeah? Okay. There's only two, was there another one? Did I see another one? So there's possibly three. Councillor Hiller. I don't know how.
Possibly three. My proposal, probably fairly obviously, is that we do allow this application against officer's recommendation, but with that very firm condition, as I've outlined before, that it is restricted to the travelling community for future occupancy, existing and future. Thank you, Chair.
It's clear for you, Mr. Harding?
Through you, Chairman, yes, and do we have authority for any other waifs and strays in terms of additional conditions that may be required?
Seconder. Councillor Iqbal. All those in favour of that motion? Eight against. Is that two? Can you put your hands up if you've got... So I couldn't tell if you were So 2 against and any abstentions? 1 abstention. So that motion is approved. So in that case, can you just announce the numbers?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so the proposal to grant permission against officer recommendation with the condition to restrict the travel community, there's 8 in favour, 2 against and 1 abstention.
I keep saying motion, my apologies, that proposal is approved. Therefore the application is approved as it is. Okay, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy your new home. Okay. Oh, I've got to log in again. Okay, moving on then. Oh yes, Councillor Warren's obviously going to leave us for a minute. Yeah. They're all fed up. The TVs are fed up. Are you all ready? Okay. Item 5.3. This relates to 54 Tollgate, Bretton. And I'll pass you over to Mr. Harding to introduce the report, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So on the slide, edged in red, is the application site. As you can see, it's a corner plot. Next slide, please. Here's a Google aerial view of the application site, again, edged in red. This is the existing floor plan and block plan of the property in question. And this is the existing elevations of the dwelling. The proposal, could you go back please, Dan? The proposal is in 3 elements. So to go through each of those in turn and to help you read the next slide. So on the top left hand corner you've got the front elevation. So immediately to the right of the front door, you've got a ground floor triple window with a first floor triple window above, and that section there is cut back from where the front door is positioned, and the proposal is to infill that cut back area with a 2-storey tall extension to the front and have a flat roof on the top of that 2-storey extension. The second part of the proposal is a side extension which starts where you can see the existing cut back on the front elevation, and again that's 2-storey with a flat roof, and then to the rear there's a 1-storey flat roof extension. So if we go to the next slide, you can see each of those elements. So to start in reverse, at the rear you've got a blue square in the centre of a grey box, and that's the ground floor rear extension, and then you've got the side extension that fronts the street, and then you've got the extension to the front, and that comes a little bit more clear when we go to the next slide with the elevation drawings. Oh, we've got the ground floor layout. Could you go to the next one, please? Next one. Yep. So this is the front elevation, and you can see the floor to ceiling windows, triple windows. That's the front entrance to the dwelling, and above there you can see the first floor extension. So that section there infills the recess on the original dwelling. And then to the right of that, in the brown shading, you've got the side extension, which is set back from the front extension. Next slide, please, Dan. That's the side elevations and the rear elevations. So the side elevation on the left-hand side, you can see the ground floor single-storey flat-roofed extension that heads out towards the garage. And again, you can see that on the right-hand side of the right-hand rear elevation drawing. You can see that at first floor level on the left-hand side of that rear elevation, there's a dormer roof extension, and that goes inside the side extension that's proposed. Next slide, please, Dan. That's the other south elevation. So those 4 windows, ground to floor, on the left-hand side, those are looking across the garden towards the street. And that's shown on the right-hand side, where you've got the proposed dwarf wall that's fronting the street. Next slide, please. So here is a picture of Tollgate looking back towards Bretton Gate. This is a slide looking down with the Bretton Gate junction behind the photographer, looking towards the application site, marked in red with the arrow. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the rear and side elevation of the application site. Next slide, please. So the application site, is on the right-hand side of the photographer. And this is the general street scene, showing the character of the properties in the road. Next slide, please, Dan. On the left-hand slide, the application property is the right-hand property. Sorry, did I get that right? On the left-hand slide, it's the right-hand property. Better thought I'd check that one. And on the right-hand slide, the application site is in the middle. Next slide, please. So here's the application site, front and centre. So you can see to the right of that dormer window, there's that cutback that's going to be infilled with a 2-storey front extension. Next slide, please, Dan. That left-hand slide shows the side elevation of the property, to which is going to be attached the 2-storey flat roof side extension. Next slide, please, Dan. And this shows the location of where the ground floor single-storey flat roofed extension is going to go. And again, this shows the general appearance of the street scene. Next slide, please, Dan. Is that it? That's it. Thank you. So our concerns with this particular development proposal are the appearance of the 2 flat roof 2-storey extensions. We consider that they will be of awkward appearance in relation to the design and appearance of the proposed dwelling. We don't think it's a very good design solution to the accommodation that the applicant is seeking, and therefore we're recommending that the application is refused. We're happy with the proposed rear ground floor extension. We've got no concerns with that, and the other matters in relation to parking, access, and the proposed wall are matters that can be resolved by way of condition. So our concern rests with the design and appearance of the 2 flat-roofed extensions to the front and to the side. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr Harding. Okay, firstly we have Councillor Warren, please, who's already seated. Councillor Warren, you'll have 10 minutes when you're ready to address committee.
And yeah, thank you. Afternoon, Planning Committee. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee on this plan, and I would like to consider this plan to be accepted. The reason why Mr Sin is building this extension is to create a family home and nothing else. This property, even though it states as a 3-bedroom property, is actually a 2-bedroom property, as one of the bedrooms is just big enough for a small bed and is not really accommodating for Mr Sin's family. With regards to the objections about out of character, this actually follows the street scene on the opposite side of the road, as I believe 37 Tollgate has a similar extension, including a similar wall on the property. This client would be quite willing to do a conditions on that wall if you're mindful to approve it. There's also a condition about a complaint about the open space. As you can see, the open space is not something that's relative to what we can do or build anything, so I quite happily do open spaces. I believe that this open space has got no real purpose, so I can see no problems with building an extension on this open space. And also on the future occupier status, with regards to the garages and the conversion of the garage, this was actually in the original plan for the site and was rightly rejected by the planning team. I would like to report on the report that Urban Development section states that this is a good build, and there is one objection in this residence that has an objection about this. I actually went to go and speak to the lady that was objecting this plan, and she was objecting on the lack of parking, and you can see that the garage at the back is Mr Sin's, so he's got a parking at the back and a parking at the front of the property, and this will just be a family home. And I think her concerns was this was to be turned into a HMO, and this is just for a family home. Her other complaint was about the building noise, and most of the building noise will be done during the daytime, where it won't be adversely affecting any of the neighbourhoods. And you'll also see this is actually on a junction, and it's a very kind of strange area because we've got a location of a school, and as we have raised quite numerous times about safeties around schools, the flow of traffic doesn't actually use that as a proper junction to what you see, because most of it flows through the school and out of it. So even though you look at it and see it as a junction, it is not actually used as a proper junction because most of the cars just go around in a circle in a one-way system to kind of help with the safety of the schools. So this will not impact on the sight of traffic getting out of that junction. And on these grounds, I would like the Planning Committee to approve the plan for Mr Sin so he can continue to live in Breton and build this family home. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Warren. Any questions? Councillor Hiller, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Councillor Warren. You talked about the one objector being primarily concerned about parking, which is fine, I accept that, but why wouldn't I accept that? But in the officer's report, it says the one letter of objection was received from an adjacent neighbour who raised the following concerns. And the first concern is its large increase in size and dominant situation on a corner plot would make it an overbearing eyesore, out of character and unacceptably awkward and detrimental to the street scene around it. You didn't mention any of that.
She didn't mention anything.
I haven't finished.
Sorry.
Are you saying that that wasn't said?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I purposely went down and had a little chat with the lovely lady. She's nice and lovely, and she did not mention anything about the size of the character of the properties. All she mentioned was the parking and the construction.
Thank you, Councillor Warren, if I might. Chair, you had a little chat with a nice and lovely lady. She's actually written in response to this, according to our officer's report, and I'll get confirmation from Mr. Harding that that is the case, and why I see no reason why it wouldn't be. And she's damned the dominant situation on the corner plot, an overbearing eyesore, quote unquote, out of character and unacceptably awkward and detrimental to the street scene. You're maintaining that she didn't actually make those comments. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? No? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, hang on a minute, Councillor Jones.
Yeah, just a question, please. I went to the site. I couldn't see anywhere around there that was of similar design. Am I missing something? Councillor Warren said...
It's Councillor Warren, you're asking the question.
Yeah, you know, I couldn't see anything. I had to look round to see if anything of that size and shape, and in all honesty, I could see a lot of that character, but I couldn't actually see anything else of that nature. You know, is there anything to support your assertions that there is?
Yeah, it's on the opposite side. So if you look opposite across the property, and it's almost like a mirror image. So it's, I believe it's number 37. So it's, you know, it's not directly in front. It's kind of, if you was to flip that onto the other side, it's down the other side. So it's on number 37 Tollgate.
Anyone else? No. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Warren. Mr. Singh, when you're ready, you have 5 minutes to address committee.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Basically, we just want to build a family home. Been there now 15 years with the children, and I've got a 15-year-old girl, a 13-year-old boy, and a 10-year-old boy, and bedrooms are just not sufficient for them to, well, it's not sufficient anymore really for the space. And you also mentioned there was a flat roof on the side extension. There isn't a flat roof on the side extension. It carries on exactly the same roof line as the existing property building. So there isn't a flat roof. There was a flat roof at the front, the section that's infilled, but the one that's on the side, it continues with the line of the same roof ridge, same roof line, so it looks exactly the same from the side.
Go back a couple of pictures for me.
That the roof line and everything will be exactly the same. That's why we've got chalet bedrooms.
Like that. Okay.
Through you, Chairman, my mistake. I did accidentally say that. My
There's
apologies.
no flat roofs. It just carries on the same as the rest of the buildings, the rest of the houses.
Okay. Yes, Councillor.
So there is a flat roof to the side, but
not to the side, to the front.
To the extension to the front.
Yes.
And then there's an extension to the side which mirrors that same flat roof.
No, it carries on, as you can see there.
Above the French doors.
Yeah, it's pitched.
It's pitched.
Yes. It's pitched both sides, the front and rear. It's exactly the same. It's just set back.
Oh, it's set back.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
No, I've got it. I've got it. Yes, Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you very much. We have one objector from number 53 Tollgate. Did you get an opportunity to speak to...
Yes, I've spoken to Sue, her name is, she's lovely. What it was is the original plans that we put in, the extension of the rear extension, where we've got the glass lantern style roof, was actually connected, was going all the way back to the garage. It was going to actually connect to the garage and have a utility room and so on, and that's what she objected to because she said it was too long. But since then the plans have been changed. They've been changed 3 times to try to accommodate whatever the planners were asking us to do. Because originally, again, the side extension was up to the pavement. Then the planners came back to us and asked us to go, we need to be at least a metre into the garden. So we came back, so it's a metre off the pavement in, so we're going to leave a metre length of green all the way down the side as well.
So you're saying to me that you spoke to her and she had some concerns and you addressed those concerns by amending your plan. Yeah. But she still maintains her objection. Why is that?
I have no idea. I have no idea. She, I think a lot of it was to do with the building works and the traffic. That was a lot of what I was getting from her. You know, the builders are going to be there, their lorries, the wagons, and so on. But that was it, really. But originally, I put my hands up. Yeah, maybe it was too long at the back, and she was going to see just the wall. But we've only gone back now, as far as her, she's got a rear extension. So we've only gone back to mirror what everybody else has done and changed all that.
Yes, Councillor Jones.
Good afternoon, Mr. Singh. Just looking here, you've got the one objector. We've got, I can't see it. There's number in support. One, who is that and on what basis are they supporting your application? Or is that you?
No, it's not me. It's not me. I know. I think it could be the lady. It could be Debbie, who lives literally behind us. Who's having an extension work done. If I think you see some of the building works going on in front of her house, she might have said it because herself and there was a couple of neighbours who live across the road. They were all positive about the development, saying that it would be nice for the area.
They're okay with it?
Yeah, they were positive. Yeah, positive. Yeah.
Councillor Hogg.
Just for clarification purposes, so currently there's a brick wall that connects the back of the house to the garage, so to kind of delineate the rear garden. That doesn't seem to be on the plans. Are you getting rid of that?
No, that's staying.
That's staying.
We're actually about, I think, 700 away from that wall.
Okay, because that's not on the plan.
No,
so
no. That's Sue's wall. That's my neighbour's wall, and that's staying where it is. Yeah. And we're not building up to it. We're about 700 away, 700 mil away.
No, this is the brick wall that connects the back of your house to your garage.
The dwarf wall?
No, not dwarf wall. It's
full-size wall. It's a 6-foot wall, isn't it?
You've got a 6-foot wall that goes from the back of the house to the front of the garage.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That wall is not on the plans. There's a wall right at the front of, or to the side of the property, with the gates, that is a dwarf wall, but it seems to me that it means that you're going to have no privacy in your back garden if that wall doesn't remain. So I'm trying to work out if that's coming down or
no, that wall is remaining at the back. That wall is remaining, yes.
Okay, just it's not in the plans. Because my concern is that the dwarf wall will go up and there'll be a row of Leylandii trees that will suddenly grow up behind that and suddenly to get the privacy in your back garden.
No.
Any other questions, please, from Mr. Singh? Right. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Singh. Right. Okay. Would you like to turn your mic off for me, Mr. Singh, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Okay. Questions to officers? None. Oh.
I suppose I've just better address that same question really to officers. Is that wall, the plans that we had before us do not have the wall on. And as I said, my concern is that it's a kind of lack of privacy to the back garden. I'm just wondering if you can sort of clarify the issue for me.
Yes, Arne?
Yep, through you. The wall isn't shown on the proposed drawings. However, we wouldn't ordinarily sort of condition the retention of the wall unless it was sort of proven to be sort of necessary. I think if that wall were retained, then it would have the effect of dividing the garden into essentially two portions. So you'd have the proposed ground floor extension looking out onto a patio, and you'd have the living room opening up looking towards the garage as it does now, but then you'd have the side extension formal living room looking into what would ostensibly be a sort of a private amenity area, albeit on public show. So if you, I can't remember whether or not you were on the site inspection or not, but it would be sort of open to view in that instance. But the decision on whether or not the applicant wished to subsequently add a wall or fence, would be for him and his family to decide. A dwarf wall is proposed at this current moment in time. If the applicant wished, a fence up to 1 metre could be erected adjacent to the highway without the need for consent, and if that fence were put back so that it didn't constitute being adjacent to the highway, then a fence or wall up to 2 metres could be erected.
It's just that there's a planning permission that's currently going through in my ward, where I understand that if he was told that if he removes the fence, then the land to the side of the house is deemed to be amenity land, whereas the behind the fence is garden. That if you take the fence down, it then blurs that line between garden and amenity. Can you clarify that for me? Maybe I've misunderstood that situation.
Through you, Chairman, I can only speak sort of generally, but what you sometimes find on housing developments, particularly in the 70s and 80s, is that you'll have something like a corner plot, and there will be what appears to be a wide highway verge adjacent to the footway. Then you have the wall or fence that's visually clearly associated with a particular residential property, and it is the case in that scenario that quite often that what appears to be a highway verge is actually the property of the homeowner as opposed to the local authority as public open space, alternatively the highway authority. And usually there are conditions put in place that say you need to apply for planning permission if you're going to wall or fence this area in. So that's what can sometimes happen, and I think that's what you're referring to. But in this particular case, is that if committee considers that the design and appearance of the extensions is acceptable, those do have the effect of encroaching into the sort of the verdant area which is in that that zone of, it's not highway land, it's not public open space, it's owned by the applicant, but it has the appearance of public open space or verge. This side extension is encroaching into that. So if you're happy with that design, the erection of a wall or fence along the boundary is perhaps a moot point, provided obviously that sufficient highway visibility is provided at the entrance to and from the garage.
Okay, thank you. We've done that bit. So we'll move to debate then. Who wants to start that? Councillor Hiller's got his pinky up. Yes. Councillor Hiller.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I don't actually have any strident views against this extension. Frankly, it does make the property very tight on the plot, I have to say, and it's almost a case of overdevelopment, perhaps. But if that's okay with the applicant, then who am I to disagree? The roof line carries on to the end of the extension. The flat roof in the front, two-story extension, sort of mirrors that dormer. I don't, it's still a relatively attractive house for the original design. So I personally wouldn't object to that. I don't think. I mean, we've got one objection which is a little bit in question. 1 minute the lady objects, and if it is indeed a lady, then she doesn't. We've heard Debbie and Sue and all. I don't know. So I think we effectively have to discount that from what the applicant has said, that this is a revision of an original design, which perhaps was the issue with the objector. The rear extension, the flat roof, and the orangery effect from that, I think that's quite an attractive design. I'm a little bit concerned that LP 17 appears to be ridden roughshod over amenity provision, amenity of existing occupiers, with the removal of that wall, and I think that would be my only particular concern about this. I think LP 16, I actually agree with Councillor Warren. I think that I don't see that it doesn't contribute positively. I suppose it's marginal at best, but it's not to the detriment, in my opinion. It's a modern estate property. It's a very well spaced out. I actually drove around there at the weekend and just had a look at the outside, and it's quite, for a modern estate. It's very pleasant. I don't have any real issues with it, Chair. I have to say. So I think at this stage I'm minded probably to disagree with our officers. There is only one reason for refusal, which is, and it cites LP 16. I've covered LP 16. My reservation would be perhaps more with LP 17, and I think we ought to condition, as was suggested in the report, that we could be readily imposed, requiring that a more substantial and taller fence boundary treatment be erected in a position, blah de blah de blah. So that's where I am at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to join debate? Ooh, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I was round there, and I can understand the misgivings from planning about it looking ungainly, and the phrase "caught in a pint pot" springs to mind. But Mr. Singh has lived there for 15 years, and apart from one objection, nobody seems to be particularly anti. The design isn't necessarily to my taste, but it's not me who has to live there or look at it, and I'm mindful that it's in someone else's ward. I think probably what has sprung to mind is looking at it, again, as Councillor Hill has suggested, is LP 17 and the dwarf wall, and what lies behind LP 16. But LP 17 is the one that makes me just suck on my teeth a little about what it's going to look like when it's built and the privacy in your garden.
Well, anybody else? Councillor Hogg.
So this is a difficult one, I have to say, because it's very kind of dare I say, sitting on the fence on this one, and the fence actually being a brick wall. That I'm uneasy about the kind of the lack of privacy that is afforded by the removal of that wall. I think it's maybe been overlooked. I don't know. But from my point of view, I think it needs to have some sort of fence or brick wall to provide a degree of privacy to the patio area and the back garden, what I would describe as being the back garden. The dwarf wall clearly doesn't do that. And as I said, when I asked the question, I was mindful of the fact that maybe some landline trees will suddenly sprout up behind the brick wall, and before you know it, you've got a 6-foot barrier in the way, and that would then be too far forward in terms of sight lines, etc., etc. So. Yeah, I'm very much sitting on the fence on this one. I think the LP 16 it is a big extension on a fairly medium-sized plot, and I think it's pushing the limits. I don't think it particularly goes way over the line on that, and I think I can understand why officers have said that they think it's too big, but I think that, you know, we need to cut them a little bit of slack, and I think that it's okay in terms of the size. But I am concerned about that barrier between the back, you know, the loss of privacy for the back garden.
Okay, fine. Anybody else? I think it draws one of my usual sort of speeches about visiting the site and having a look, because you had to look around the area. I appreciate Councillor Warren has told us about what it's generally like around there, and Councillor Hill has explained it, but for me it's quite almost a focal point when you come around that bend, that's straight in front of you, that house. I don't know if you can still see the picture, but you come around, it's there, so it's there. And walking up to it, my concern is this flat roof bit, to be honest with you, and how far it projects out into that corner. This, I don't know, like you're saying, Councillor Hogg, it just feels for me a bit big, and I don't like that flat roof bit at all. I don't think that fits at all. I think that a better design would have been like to carry on the roof fully down and carry on the dormer, sort of might have swung me a bit more on that front bit. Don't know. The wall, yeah, it's a real problem. You know, if that's an open back garden, you're going to have problems, Mr. Seal. So, don't know. I'm a bit like that as well. I'm actually, I think for me, taking the three things into account, for me, it's too much and it needs redesigning, and I'm going to go against in this view. I think it needs another look. Close, but I don't think we're there. Anybody else wish to come into the debate? Anybody have a proposal? Oh, sorry, I do apologise, Councillor. I didn't see your finger up.
No problem, Chair. It was just to pick up on the latter point that I accept what you're saying in terms of the piece around the flat roof, but that doesn't concern me as much as what Councillor Hogg has referred to around the wall and the boundary. However, page 97, there is the comment made by the officers in terms of putting a condition in place. If that was done, I'm not sure I then see an issue with that. I think that's the bigger piece of the biggest concern from my perspective.
So would that be like
but unfortunately, I haven't been on the site visit, so I can't comment in terms of the in keeping. So I have to defer to other members on that.
Could I just ask you, Mr. Harding, if a condition such as that was put forward? Because I'm always wary of changing an application, because that's not what we're here to do. We can put conditions on, I accept that, but would we have to do it as a woolly condition to basically say something like that? It would have to be a boundary treatment that was satisfactory for officers. Would it have to be in that sort of wording, or could we say you've got to put a 6-foot wall up? This is where I'm coming from. One is you've got to do this.
Yeah, so the type of condition we'd be looking at is that it would say details of a 1.8 metre wall or fence needs to be submitted to the local planning authority at a specified time, so it'd be sort of prior to first occupation of the development, be agreed and then implemented prior to occupation of the extension.
So then going back to Councillor Hogg's point, looking at when I went there, looking how far that is out towards the footpath, that would be effectively a 6-foot wall or fence within a foot or so, maybe, of the footpath, which you couldn't normally do.
It would require planning consent, so you've got to separate what is permitted development and applying for it. It doesn't automatically say that we're going to refuse applications for walls or fences abutting the the footway. But we'd have to allow enough room for the visibility displays for coming in and out of the the garage.
Okay. Good one, isn't it? Anybody else got anything to add? Because I'm going to have to go to proposal unless somebody else wants to try. Councillor Jones.
I'm probably just boiling my cabbages twice. I'm, you know, I want Mr. Singh to be happy where he is, and I would like to see him extend the property. And you know, but having looked at the site as you did and its position, I'm really struggling with that design in that place rather than your attempts to, Mr. Singh's attempts to extend his house. Having been there and seen it, that's what's gnawing away at me, I'm afraid.
Didn't help. Councillor Hussain.
Couple of things. Firstly, yeah, from the site visit, I think it was in the wall that Councillor Hogg mentioned is the current boundary wall, which obviously would then form part of the garden, so that wouldn't be there from my understanding. I think the idea of a condition to ensure there is privacy is a good idea. We don't have to live on that street, and looking at the objections, there was one objection which Councillor Warren has said, you know, the lady isn't concerned about it's more about the construction and the issues around that. The street scene I don't think would be affected as much. The flat roof initially was an issue for me, but as that's been sort of clarified, that it's not on the side of the building, it's just at the front in the infill. I think looking at the rest of the houses on there with the dormer windows, I think the line of the flat roof goes in line with the dormer windows. So I think that's in keeping with the design of the rest of the houses, bar obviously the extension. So in that sense, and because they've lived there 15 years, I'm guessing it's an area that they like and they enjoy living in. So initially I thought it was a bit too much for the size of the site, but having a large family myself, I can see, you know, the sort of need of the residents. So in light of that, if we can sort of put maybe add a condition of a decent sized wall for privacy, I would look to go for approval and go against officer's recommendation on this one.
Okay. I don't think we need to go anymore. I need to look for a proposal then. Anybody want to put a proposal forward? Sorry, was that Did I see? Yes, Councillor Hiller. Sorry, I didn't see you put your hand up.
I did look around, Chair, so I wasn't...
No, I saw another hand go, but it wasn't...
Yeah, I'm happy to put a proposal. I listened to what members have quite rightly said about the, you know, the subjective nature of the aesthetic, if that's not too mangled a syntax, the aesthetic nature of the proposal in front of us, and I think it's an on balance thing. It potentially isn't the best extension in the world, but hey ho, the limitations of the plot, the limitations of the original property will determine that's probably as good as it gets. Is as good as it gets good enough? That's for us to decide. Our officers have jumped one side of the fence and said no, it isn't good enough. I'm actually minded to say, you know what, it's not that bad. Does it add positivity to the area? Probably more than it detracts from the area, in my opinion. So, you know, with that condition I mentioned about, and it was already suggested, it's not my brainwave, as already suggested in the officer's report, the LP17 conditioning the higher wall, and leave our officers to sort out the detail of that. My proposal would be that we accept the proposal against the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Hussain this time. All those in favour? Oh, blimey. It was a slow reaction. I know it's a long day. We will do, yeah. Okay. Okay, against? Oh, I feel like the guilty there. Oh, I've got two. That's no abstentions, and I don't believe. Would you like to give us the numbers when you're ready, Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so that proposal to go against officer recommendation is approved, 8-4, 2 against.
Okay, so the application is approved. I'm just going to double check, Mr. Harding, you're happy with?
Sorry,
yes.
Put in a bit about the condition.
That's what I'm just going to ask now, to make sure the condition's there before we actually say it.
Sorry, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chris. No, you're right. I didn't want to forget it. So, condition-wise.
Yeah, so the conditions would be, one, to do with the boundary treatment, and two, there'd be any other sundry conditions that we would apply routinely to house extensions. So that'd be sort of the materials conditions, plan compliance.
Yeah, everybody happy with that? Okay, so based on the vote, the application is then approved. So well done. Thank you. Enjoy your... Right. Okay. I've got an IT failure here, but I do know the next section we're moving on to is a report on planning performance with regard to appeals. So I'm just going to introduce it like that for you, please, Nick.
Yep. Thank you very much, Chairman. Apologies, in paragraph 3.4 there's a table of our appeals performance, and we've managed to miss out putting the July to September figures in, which should read 3 appeals decided, 1 allowed, with the allowed performance figure being 33%. So apologies for that, Chairman.
That's all right.
So that's a good outturn figure for the last quarter, and it still keeps us on the right side of the national key performance indicator levels required of us by government. So that's good news. In terms of the 3 appeals that we've had a determination on, I can quickly go through those. First one is Ivy Cottage. We recommended that for refusal under delegated powers, and the appeal was won by us. We gave 2 reasons for refusal. One was that it was a proposal for a dwelling located in the open countryside, contrary to policy. So the inspector agreed with that side of our argument. The second reason for refusal that we tabled was related to flood risk, but as part of the appeal process, some additional flood risk information was submitted by the appellant, and that was found to be satisfactory by the inspector. We didn't win on all reasons for refusal, but we did in relation to the main reason for refusal. Next site is Cobnut Cottage at Castor. We gave 3 reasons for refusal. This is for an infill dwelling located in the village. The 3 reasons for refusal were related to impact on a tree preservation order protected tree. Second reason was the impact that the tree would have on the proposed occupier. So that's things through shading and sap drip from the tree. And the third reason for refusal related to access, and I'm pleased to say that we won the case on all 3 grounds. So that appeal was unsuccessful. The final appeal that we lost related to, again, an infill dwelling, and we refused it on the grounds that the proposal would have an overbearing impact on the amenity of the adjacent dwelling, and the inspector disagreed, having looked at it. He felt that in terms of one outlook, yes, it would be a detrimental situation, but in terms of the remaining 2 outlooks from the property, those were being retained and would more than make up for the loss that was being incurred. So that appeal was allowed. None of the appeal decisions resulted in an award of costs against us, nor in our favour. I'm happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Yes, any questions at all? No. Can I just sort of like ask you to pass on our thanks and congratulations for a good result. Appeals are appeals, and that's the right democratic way. And it's good to see that we didn't have costs, so we weren't being seen as being unfair. which is the one thing you don't want to be doing. At least it's one against the other, and he didn't agree on one of them, but he didn't think the comments were unfair on the person, and we were being unfair, so we didn't get cost, which is good news. And overall, the percentage is extremely low, isn't it? You've only given us the 3 last one, so good. Yes, Councillor.
On the flooding appeal, some more information, if possible, passed on. Yes?
On the where?
Flooding, the appeal issue, which Mr. Harding mentioned.
Yeah, I can,
yes.
I can provide those to you separately.
Yes, if you would.
On the one that gave extra information that the inspector was okay with, yeah, that's fine. Anything else, anybody? No? Okay, good. All right, then I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been quite a long one, but been some really good debate on that. Bit of fence sitting, but then that's what we're here for, I guess. Sometimes we have to go one side or the other, don't we? So, but overall, very good. Thank you very much.